Chapter 281. Previously, those merchants had sought out cousin Yang Fu in the name of a reasonable loan, saying that they were in urgent need of silver. As long as they could meet their demands, they could accept an appropriate increase in interest. They were clearly trying to take advantage of the situation. The Yang clan bank was in a crisis, so Yang Fu had naturally rejected these requests. This action had caused them to speak carelessly, greatly affecting the reputation of the Yang clan bank. Now that the new silver had come in, and a large number of Walla merchants had followed them, it could be seen that this was a large sum of money coming into the account. Thus, it would not be Yang Qindong's personality if he did not use this opportunity to strike back. These thoughts instantly formed in Yang Qindong's mind. Yang Si naturally did not react so quickly, but since the order was given by the sixth young master, he would naturally obey unconditionally. After agreeing, he quickly left the study to deliver the news. When he was the only one left in the study, Yang Qindong used the candlelight to look at the map hanging on the wall and stood there for a long time. Very few people in the capital knew that Tung Mountain and the Bai clan caravan had returned. Early in the morning, after Dong Chunhua had her breakfast, she sat in the carriage that had been prepared beforehand. Accompanied by a few of her attendants, she headed straight for the Yang village. Along the way, Dong Chunhua was naturally excited. This time, he was representing the emperor in reprimanding the Duke of Loyalty and then ordering him to admit his wrongs. This was an awe-inspiring matter. Moreover, after this matter was completed, he might even be promoted. No matter how he thought about it, he was extremely happy. This was the Duke of Loyalty. He had once saved Ingzong's life and helped Emperor Zong stabilize the country. He was not even 20 years old, but he had relied on his own efforts to obtain the title of Duke of Loyalty. He was also known as the God of War and the Commander of the East. How glorious was that! And now, he had to take the initiative to admit his mistake under his own reprimand. How satisfying was that! Presumably, after this matter would become a stepping stone for him to climb up the ranks. It would also become the most glorious thing in his life. Filled with excitement, the carriage left the capital and arrived at the Yang family manor. As soon as the carriage arrived, the attendant immediately shouted at Lung Feng, who was a few dozen meters away. Quickly inform the Duke of Loyal Courage to come here. My lord has a verbal order from the emperor. Wait. Since the other party claimed to have the emperor's orders, Lung Feng didn't dare to be negligent. Although the others were still keeping a close eye on the newcomer, they still sent a soldier to the inner courtyard of the Yang clan manor. Yang Qindong didn't have any classes to teach this morning. At this time, he was watching the four ladies play mahjong. This was also something that he had invented. Once it appeared, many people accepted it. Over the past few days, the Immortal Abode's business had taken a hit. Madame Shui and Madame Xiang stayed in the manor and learned mahjong from Madame Huyen. The four of them were perfect for a game. Yang Qindong, on the other hand, had become a spectator. All he could do was occasionally stand in front of Madame Shui and Madame Xiang, who weren't playing too well, and point at them. Yang Qindong, who had just ordered Madame Shui to play a bad tile and fired a cannon at Huyen, received a beautiful eye roll from her. When he saw Tiger's mane appear outside the door, he immediately walked over. As soon as he saw the young master, Tiger's mane said, "Dong Chunhua is here." Yang Qindong wasn't surprised in the slightest. On the contrary, he seemed to be looking forward to it. He's finally willing to show himself? No one knew that early in the morning, the Bureau of Security had sent word that Gao Xiong had led 200 Lung Feng and 2,000 naval reinforcements to attack the Tianjin garrison last night. They had entered through the port that had stopped construction. They had suddenly appeared and caught the Ming Army Guard post off guard. They captured more than 3,000 people and seized countless military resources. The Bureau of Security had contacted them through a very important radio station, so they had received the news early in the morning. The Ming Army, which could only be informed orally, would not receive the news until the next morning, even if they used an 800-mile express. This was the advantage of advanced technology. Sometimes, the earlier they got the news, the earlier they could prepare, and the higher their chances of winning would be. It was at this time that Dong Chunhua appeared. This person had grasped the timing very well. If it had been a day ago, Yang Chendong would not have been so confident. However, since the other party had only appeared after receiving the news, he had no choice but to properly entertain the other party. Very well, since the guest is here, let him in. Yang Chendong's face was full of sarcasm. By the way, the students should be doing exercises between classes now. Arrange to meet him there. Understood, young master. Tiger's Mane's face was also full of excitement. This Dong Chunhua actually dared to recklessly go against the young master. Since that was the case, he would show him some power and let him meet with a nose full of dust. He would let him know who he could never afford to offend. There were less than 70 people left in the Yang Chendong Academy. Even with this number, it was still decreasing. But those who stayed were all gold. They all had something they were good at and were appreciated by Yang Chendong, which was why they had stayed until now. When Yang Chendong appeared, these people were doing exercises between classes. This was also Yang Chendong's request. They could study and train their bodies at the same time. He did not want bookworms. These students did not have to be better than those in the military, but they had to at least be healthy. Yang Chendong's appearance immediately attracted everyone's attention. Originally, there was no teacher's class, so they did not know why Dong Shuai would appear here. But they soon had an answer. An official wearing the Ming Dynasty's third-rank official's uniform walked into the field under the guidance of Yang Si. The person's lips were slightly thin, and his body was slightly plump. His eyes were constantly moving, and he first glanced contemptuously at the nearly 70 academy students standing on the square. He even involuntarily let out a cold snort from his nose. Then, he stared at Yang Chendong without the slightest hint of respect in his expression. The person who came was Dong Chunhua. The reason why he looked at the academy with such a cold gaze was because once Yang Chendong fell, these students of the Yang Chendong Academy would be ostracized by everyone. Such a person would not be accepted by everyone. Such a person naturally had no future. Since he was a person with no future, why should he give him any face? When he looked at Yang Chendong, there was not the slightest respect in his expression. His attitude was very clear. He thought that this loyal duke would fall without a doubt. Facing such a person who was about to lose power, he did not even bother to show respect on the surface. Dong Chunhua's performance was very realistic. Yang Chendong also did not look at the other party. Even if the person came and was already standing there, he still treated him as invisible air and did not pay any attention to him. This made Dong Chunhua, who was standing there, embarrassed. He was a dignified third-rank official of the imperial court who was about to enter the second rank. Coming to a manor and being ignored was definitely a slap in the face. But he came uninvited, so he could not blame others. Cough helplessly, in order to show his existence. He had to cough heavily to attract everyone's attention. Sure enough, this cough made Yang Chendong gently turn his face, as if he had just noticed him. His face was full of surprise as he said, "Who are you? How did you appear in my Yang family academy?" Face to face, Yang Chendong did not recognize him. Dong Chunhua was angry in his heart. Thinking back to the time when Dong Shuai got married, he came with the officials to congratulate. At that time, everyone was chatting happily. How long had it been? And now he did not recognize him. Knowing that Yang Chendong deliberately did this, Dong Chunhua still had to introduce himself. "I am the left deputy imperial censor of the censorate, Dong Chunhua. I am here to speak on behalf of the emperor." After saying this arrogantly, Dong Chunhua looked up to the sky, waiting for Yang Chendong to say the three respectful words, "Follow the emperor's orders." But when he looked up to the sky, he did not get any response. When he turned his head back to look, he was so angry that smoke almost came out of his 7 orifices. He saw that Yang Chendong was focused on the students of the academy doing exercises. He did not have the slightest intention of replying. It was as if he was talking to the air just now. "Loyal and courageous? What are you doing?" In anger, Dong Chunhua could not help but scold loudly. And, after being shouted, Yang Chendong turned his head very casually. Immediately, an unstoppable murderous aura appeared in his eyes. When this murderous gaze landed on Dong Chunhua, It actually caused his entire body to involuntarily tremble and his legs to tremble. At this moment, he seemed to see a knife shining with cold light on his neck, as if it would fall and take his life at any time. In his previous life, Yang Chendong had broken through a mountain of corpses and a sea of fire. In this life, he had become Yang Chendong, so he had a good grasp of the murderous aura. Suddenly putting this murderous aura on Dong Chunhua, who was born as a scholar, the effect could be imagined. Looking at Dong Chunhua, who was shivering all over, Yang Chendong said with displeasure in his voice, "What are you shouting here for? Don't lose the face of a scholar." He was actually reprimanded. Dong Chunhua was so angry that his teeth were chattering. He thought in his heart, "How is this possible? How is this possible?" It was said that no matter what rank an official was, when someone came to speak on behalf of the emperor, they should respectfully say the 3 words, "Obey the emperor's orders." Only in this way could they show respect for the emperor's power, which was the duty of an official. It was with this thought that Dong Chunhua came to Yang village with full confidence. But after coming here, he realized that everything was so different. This young, loyal, and courageous duke did not seem to take him or the emperor's admonitions seriously. Chapter 282. Of course, if Dong Chunhua knew that even when facing Zhu Qiyu, Yang Chendong did not have the slightest bit of respect in his heart, then he would be relieved. Dong Chunhua, who was being reprimanded, felt that his momentum was rapidly declining. He could not even guarantee that if this continued, he would not be able to complete his next sentence. In order to complete his mission, he could not turn around and leave. What he had to do was to complete his mission with anger. Dong Chunhua did not want to talk to Yang Chendong anymore. He also felt that he could not gain any advantage, so he did not even look at the Duke of Zhongdan. Instead, he said what he had prepared before. The emperor has decreed that Japan has been a friendly neighbor of the great Ming dynasty for generations. Duke of Zhongdan tore down Japan's gate for no reason, beat up the envoy, and almost caused a war between the 2 countries. This is a serious crime. The Duke of Zhongdan is ordered to apologize to the Japanese envoy immediately after receiving the decree to clear up the misunderstanding and reconcile the 2 sides. Dong Chunhua had already memorized Zhu Qiyu's reprimand. Now that he opened his mouth, it was very smooth. In his words, there was a lot of dissatisfaction. When these words were heard by the students of the Yang Academy, many of them began to breathe heavily. Obviously, they were frightened. Among the students, Junko was also among them. When she heard that the Ming emperor actually asked Yang Chendong to apologize to Kimura Yoshida, the corners of her mouth naturally curled up slightly. As a Japanese, such an action of course made her feel proud. But then, her expression became a little nervous. Over the past few days, she had gained some understanding of this young Dong Shuai. Whatever he did, he would never regret. Wanting him to admit his mistake, Emperor Ming had really made the wrong decision. But in the face of the emperor's decree, what should he do? Dong Chunhua used nearly half a cup of tea's time to recite the reprimand from beginning to end. Then, when he stopped, he looked at Yang Chendong with a gleam of gloating in his eyes. "Aren't you, Yang Chendong, awesome? Aren't you arrogant? Aren't you able to ignore me? Well then, now that the emperor has given the verbal order, do you still dare to disobey?" Dong Chunhua had a smile on her face and regained the arrogant expression she had when she arrived. However, in the end, he did not understand Yang Chendong. As a person of the later generation, he did not have the same respect for imperial power as the ancient people. If he was facing an ancient emperor, perhaps he would lower his head out of reverence. However, substitute sect master Zhu Qiyu was clearly not one of them. Seeing that Dong Chunhua had finished speaking, Yang Chendong nodded to indicate that he understood, and then waved his hand casually. Yang Si, who had accompanied him, gestured towards Dong Chunhua, indicating that he was going to lead her away from the manor. Dong Chunhua was still waiting for Yang Chendong to express his stance. She was waiting for him to lower his head and admit his mistake. How could she be willing to leave? Seeing that he was about to become an exiled person, he said angrily, "Duke of loyalty and courage?" What he said just now was His Majesty's intention to reprimand you. Don't you have anything to say? Or do you dare to disobey an imperial edict? Dong Chunhua's words could be said to strike at the heart. If Yang Qindong dared to admit this point, then he only needed to publicize it, and a rebel hat would be placed on his head. In this way, no matter how much Zhu Qiu admired this person, and how much he feared this person, he could only kill him. Otherwise, where would the imperial power be? Where would the imperial power be? Before coming here, there were people who said that Yang Qindong was extremely daring and that he rarely placed the great Ming dynasty's laws in his eyes. However, Dong Chunhua did not take it to heart and thought that everyone was exaggerating. Even if this person liked to rely on his abilities to be arrogant, he still had to lower his head in the face of imperial power. But now, Dong Chunhua finally knew that those people were not speaking nonsense. This Duke of Loyalty and Courage truly did not place the Emperor's verbal order in his eyes. This was because Yang Qindong was looking at him as if he was looking at a clown. This Duke already understands His Majesty's intentions. However, I don't agree with some of the points. The Japanese diplomatic group first sent people to assassinate this Duke. After the assassination failed, they wanted to use the two countries to threaten this Duke. Faced with such an aggressive situation, I only tore down the other party's door and beat up a few blind lackeys. I really don't know what crime I committed. Could it be that when encountering a problem, it's not about who is right, but whose fist is harder? When Dong Chunhua heard Yang Qindong's rhetorical question, his expression changed again and again. This person actually publicly said that he did not agree with His Majesty's words and decision. What was he trying to do? Was he trying to rebel? Dong Chunhua's heart was still changing with mixed feelings. Yang Qindong continued, "Lord Dong, you don't need to use imperial power to pressure me. This time, His Majesty must have been deceived by a lowly person and made such a statement. In addition, you don't need to talk about rebellion. Presumably, this is not His Majesty's intention, but something you added at the last minute, right? If this Duke wanted to rebel, why didn't I bring Ingzong back to the capital when I saved him? This kind of thing where the Son of Heaven is used to order his vassals has happened many times in history, right? If this Duke wanted to rebel, why did I lead people to beat back the Walla army when they came to the city, and then obediently return to Zhongdangong? Your thinking is still too childish. It's better to go back and think about it carefully. Oh right, this Duke also wants to advise you. In the future, if you want to question me, you should at least find someone with a higher rank, at least of the same rank as this Duke. You are just a third-rank official, you really don't deserve to have a fair conversation with this Duke." At the end, Yang Qindong laughed. However, the contempt and ridicule in that smile could be seen by anyone. He was refuted by Yang Qindong, and was even reprimanded by Yang Qindong. In the end, he was even thrown out of the manor. When Yang Si pulled him out of the manor like a little chick, Dong Chunhua's face was ashen. At this moment, he wanted nothing more than to find a hole to crawl into. Bold and presumptuous. Bold and presumptuous. Just wait for the Emperor to get angry and take away the Duke's hat. At that time, let's see how you can continue to be so imposing. Even though he was out of the manor, Dong Chunhua still shouted and shouted. Then, he angrily got on the sedan and went straight to the capital, to the imperial palace. He wanted to tell the Emperor everything that had happened here today, and then let the Emperor issue an imperial edict to punish Yang Qindong severely. Dong Chunhua left, but Yang Qindong didn't leave. He stayed on the field of the academy. His gaze swept across the nearly 70 students, and his face was solemn as he spoke. "Everyone, write an article about what happened today and hand it to me before dinner. Teacher, what do you think?" After Yang Qindong finished speaking, he prepared to leave, but a voice came from behind him. The person who spoke was the student Wang Si. Wang Si and Yu Yuanbi's fight was finally released because Li Wenxiao was investigated. From this incident, he could see that as his teacher Yang Qindong was protecting him. This made him even more determined to choose the Yang Academy and become a student here. However, Yang Qindong still disobeyed the imperial edict, and he was worried about him. Yang Qindong, who was stopped by Wang Si, stopped. After a moment of silence, he suddenly raised his head and said, "Teacher, I only know one thing, and it can be summed up in one sentence. If you fall behind, you will be beaten. If you fall behind, you will be beaten. When these simple words entered the ears of the students, their eyes immediately lit up and they felt as if they had been enlightened. Although the words were simple, the summary was very accurate. Just like how the Walla dared to invade the borders of the Great Ming Dynasty, wasn't it because the Great Ming Dynasty's national strength was weakening? Just like how the Japanese envoy dared to threaten the Great Ming Dynasty, wasn't it also because the Great Ming Dynasty was weak? If the Great Ming Dynasty was strong enough, others could only submit. How would they dare to covet the Great Ming Dynasty? Among the students, Junko was also shocked by these words. She thought of her father. If her father was strong enough, would he still need to be afraid of the other aristocratic families in the country? Would he still need to consider what General Ashikaga Yoshimasa would think? While the students were still thinking, Yang Chundong had already left the academy and returned to the inner courtyard of the Yang family manor. Pass down the order. Pay attention to every movement in the capital. Yang Chundong had to be vigilant, although he didn't think that Zhu Qiyu would do anything because of Dong Chuanhua's report. After all, this was the territory of the Great Ming Dynasty. If they really turned hostile with the strength of his subordinates, if they were not prepared, they would not be able to withstand it. And even if they were prepared, they would only be forced to leave. After all, there was a huge gap in the number of people, and it was far from being covered by an advanced firearm. Unless he wanted to kill Zhu Qiyu and those ministers, but in this way the country would be in chaos, and it was really not a blessing for the Han people. The imperial city of the capital. When Dong Chunhua saw Emperor Zhu Qiyu, he immediately angrily told him what he had done in the Yang family manor. Your Majesty, this Duke of Loyalty simply despised the imperial power and is really a traitor. If we don't get rid of him, it will not be enough to show the imperial power. After saying that, Dong Chunhua banged his head on the ground with a thump, his face full of indignation and grievance. Shut up! Zhu Qiyu's angry roar resounded throughout the hall. What kind of person was Yang Chundong? Although Zhu Qiyu didn't know much about him, he still knew some things. At least until now, this person had not shown any intention of rebelling. Otherwise, why would he save Zhu Qizhen and block the vanguard of the Walla cavalry for him? But at the same time, this person was unconstrained and liked to be free. It was because of this that after the war, he was given the title of Duke, so that he could be free and stay away from the court, and everyone would be annoyed if they didn't see each other. Of course, it was not that Zhu Qiyu didn't want to get rid of this person. But firstly, he couldn't find a suitable excuse, and secondly, this person had a very good relationship with the mercenaries. If he wanted to make a move and failed, he would have to face the roar of the storm. Chapter 283. Without absolute certainty, Zhu Qiyu wouldn't make a move. Of course, this was also because this person didn't threaten him. At least, he hadn't shown any intention of doing so. This was also why the two of them hadn't fallen out with each other yet. But now, Dong Chunhua actually wanted him to get rid of Yang Chundong. How could he make this decision lightly? This was why he had opened his mouth to scold him. Of course, Yang Chundong didn't give him face and refused to admit his wrongs. This made Zhu Qiyu angry. But being angry didn't mean that he had to get rid of him. The new army hadn't finished training yet. The safety of the Great Ming still depended on this person. Fortunately, Yang Chundong still gave him face from Dong Chuanhua's words. He explained that he hadn't received the imperial edict and said that he had been deceived by a vile person. This gave him a way out. Suddenly stopped by Zhu Qiyu's shout, Dong Chuanhua's expression changed greatly. He didn't know what he had said wrong. He hurriedly bowed his head to the ground again. Your Majesty, please calm your anger. It's not worth it to harm your health. Official Dong was angry in a moment of anger, but it is understandable. This time, the Duke of Loyalty and Courage has indeed gone too far. Jining, who had been standing to the side, saw that the emperor was angry and Dong Chunhua was frightened. She immediately stepped forward to speak as a partner. Jin Ying's words finally reached Zhu Qiyu's heart. Although he didn't want to fall out with Yang Chundong right now, this person had already done something that went against imperial authority. If he didn't do anything and word got out, it would have a big impact on his throne. Beloved official Jean, in your opinion, what should we do? Your Majesty, why don't we have Minister who reprimand the Duke of Loyalty and Courage in court tomorrow? With Minister who taking action, he will definitely have to reflect on his actions. Jean Ing had a flattering smile on her face as she made a ruthless suggestion. Oh, Zhu Qiu suddenly understood after hearing this. Not bad, not bad. Beloved official Jin's words are exactly what we want. In that case, we will hand this matter over to Hu Xiao at court tomorrow morning. Dai Zong's complexion became much better, as if a burden had been lifted from his shoulders. When he saw Dong Chunhua kneeling on the ground, he sighed and said, Beloved Minister Dong, you've worked hard these past few days. I already understand your intentions. In any case, Dong Chunhua's actions were for the sake of maintaining imperial power. Zhu Qiu naturally saw this point clearly. He needed such loyal officials. Even if they were not as capable, they could still be used. Hearing this, Dong Chunhua immediately burst into tears. His head hit the ground heavily again. Thank you, Your Majesty. Long live Your Majesty. Dong Chunhua left the palace. When she left, she was in good spirits. After the people from the Intelligence Bureau reported the situation back to Yang Village, Yang Qindong's expression didn't change when he heard the news, but he was obviously relieved. Young Master, the army in the capital hasn't moved. It seems like they don't intend to target our Yang clan. Tiger's Mane, who had come to report the situation, shared his opinion as well. Our acting emperor knows what's good for him. Yang Qindong's expression returned to normal as he spoke. When Yang Qindong defied the imperial edict this time, he had already prepared for the worst. That was Zhu Qiu would fall out with him. If that was the case, even though he had the cold blade, he had too few people. For safety's sake, he could only fight his way out of the capital. He could either meet up with Commander Gao Xiong and the others from the Tianjin garrison or go to Zhu Qizhen's place in Nanjing. After more than a year of scheming, it was certain that his estate would suffer losses. However, Zhu Qiu wouldn't be able to gain any benefits from doing so. If everyone fell out with him, his days in the capital would definitely not be easy. This was originally a situation where both sides would suffer losses. Fortunately, Zhu Qizhen didn't choose to do so. This matter allowed Yang Qindong to see where his shortcomings were. He had too few soldiers. Even if he had advanced firearms, he wouldn't be able to intimidate the enemy. The moment something unpredictable happened, there was a high chance that he would meet his foes with weapons. It seems like I'll have to find a chance to go out for a while, Yang Qindong muttered to himself. The cold blades test had been far too harsh, making the size of the army a huge problem. However, he had always walked the path of elite soldiers. Ordinary soldiers were not worthy of his attention. Most importantly, he did not want to see a large number of soldiers who believed in him die on the battlefield. That would be a very sad thing. The cold blade needed time to expand, and the defense of Crimson City also required large amounts of manpower and resources. In these circumstances, increasing the number of soldiers in a short amount of time was nothing more than a pipe dream. Since this was the case, it was better to leave the capital for a while and give himself enough time to develop. As long as the cold blade was strong enough, when he returned to the capital, he naturally wouldn't have to worry about anyone doing anything to him. Tiger's Mane issue an order. Have the Bureau of Security keep an eye on the situation in Guangxi and Guangdong. At the same time, have Commander Leng Song get ready. If something happens, we're to fish in troubled waters and expand the situation. Yang Qindong recalled the Shunping Heavenly King incident that would occur 1 month later in history, the rebellion in Guangdong, and Zhu Huituan's Miao uprising. Thus, he had prepared for a rainy day and issued a military order. The Yang clan manor was safe for the time being because of Zhu Qiu's apprehension. More importantly, he had been emperor for far too short a time, and he had inherited a terrible mess. Developing it would also require time, so he had tolerated Yang Qindong's defiance of the decree. Just because the fire had not been ignited did not mean that it would not burn. On the second day of the court session, Zhu Qiu's first order of business was to have the Minister of Rights, Hu Xiao, persuade Yang Qindong to admit his wrongs and appease the anger of the Japanese emissary. Zhu Qiyu had just arrived at court and sat on the dragon throne of the emperor, his gaze sweeping over the officials. Intentionally or unintentionally, his gaze had fallen on Hu Xiao. At this moment, a young eunuch quietly walked up to Jin Ing and whispered something to him. Originally, Jin Ing was standing there calmly with a faint smile on his face. No one could tell what he was thinking, but when he heard the eunuch's report, his face slightly paled. The eunuch said that when the city gates opened early in the morning, the cold blade soldiers responsible for opening trade with the Walla had returned, 100 of them. This meant that the Duke of Loyalty and Courage's strength in the capital had once more increased. These 100 people were not ordinary soldiers, but an army with elite and advanced firearms. He later learned that a single company of cold blade soldiers could withstand the charge of thousands or even tens of thousands of Walla's elite cavalry. Just how powerful were they? With the sudden return of an entire company of cold blade soldiers, Yang Qindong's strength had increased. If he wanted to force the Duke of Loyalty and Courage to admit his wrongs, the obstacles would be much greater. In this short period of time, Jin Ying's mind was filled with many thoughts. He suddenly felt that arranging for Hu Xiao to force Yang Qindong to admit his wrongs to the Japanese emissary was an unwise move. What he needed to do now was to stop the emperor's actions. But just as he was thinking this, Zhu Qiyu called out Hu Xiao's name. Beloved official Hu, receiving the emissaries of other countries is the responsibility of your Ministry of Rights. As for the unpleasantness between the Duke of Loyalty and the Japanese emissary, we think that you should be responsible for it. In short, we need to resolve this problem in the shortest time possible. Right now, the Great Ming does not need war. Do you understand? He suddenly called out Hu Xiao's name and handed over the task that was previously agreed to be handed over to censorate official Dong Chunhua. The expressions of all the officials changed slightly at this moment. In the imperial court where intelligent people gathered, each of them had their own thoughts. Hu Xiao had been an old official for many dynasties and had seen many storms and waves. As soon as Zhu Qiyu spoke, he guessed what had happened. He thought of the news that he had received yesterday, saying that Deputy Censorate of the Left, Dong Chunhua, had returned to the palace with a furious expression not long after entering Yang village. He could already imagine what had happened. Could it be that the Duke of Loyalty and Courage had defied the imperial edict? But did he really have the guts to do so? Also, could the Emperor of Loyalty and Courage really endure it? This was a great crime of defying an imperial edict. That would result in the confiscation of his property and the execution of 3 generations of his family. Depending on the severity of the situation, the execution of 9 generations of his family was not impossible. Hu Xiao and the other officials all had their heads lowered as they thought about something. The atmosphere in the imperial court became incomparably stifling. As the emperor, Zhu Qiyu naturally didn't want the officials' hearts to be in chaos. If their hearts were in chaos, they wouldn't be able to do anything. He immediately explained with a smile on his face, "Beloved officials, there is no need to think too much. Our Duke of Loyalty and Courage is too rule-abiding." He said that he needed an official of the same rank to talk to him. Beloved official Dong's status is a bit too low. This is also because we didn't think about it clearly before. Therefore, this time we sent beloved official who is of the same rank to give Duke of Loyalty and Courage enough face, ha ha ha. After the explanation was given, many of the officials immediately came to a realization. But as for what everyone was thinking, perhaps only they knew in their hearts. When did an imperial edict need an official of the same rank? This was clearly the emperor borrowing Hu Xiao's hand to suppress Yang Qindong. As a result, if Yang Qindong didn't lower his head, Hu Xiao wouldn't be able to explain himself. At that time, he would be accused of being unfilial. It was truly a good method. Among them, the one with an ugly expression was Dong Chunhua, who was standing in the group of officials. Seeing that the emperor's imperial favor was in his hands and that he had successfully ascended to the position, but his task had been messed up and he had been notified to all of his colleagues. It was easy to imagine how bad his mood was. But the only thing that was worth consoling was that this time, Yang Qindong didn't just slap his face, but also the emperor's face. Presumably, in order to return this slap, It wouldn't be long before the imperial edict promoting him to a second-rank official was issued. This was also why Zhu Qiyu wanted to use this matter to tell all of the officials that as long as they wholeheartedly worked for him, he would get back at them even if they were wronged. And for Dong Chunhua, this was very likely a blessing in disguise. Among the officials, the one with an ugly expression was Hu Xiao. Chapter 284. Even though Zhu Qiyu had already explained it to him, he could tell that something was different from what he had heard. Since ancient times, who would care about the identity of the person who gave the decree? Usually, when a first-rank official was ordered to do something, wouldn't a small eunuch be able to read the decree? Then why was it that when it came to Yang Chendong, there was a need for someone of the same rank to read the decree? How could things be so simple? It was clear that the emperor knew that he was Yang Chendong's elder and wanted to bully him. If this was really the case, if he didn't do this task well, not only would he attract the emperor's anger, it would also be equivalent to handing the knife to someone else. Knowing that this was the case, there was no other choice. This was what made Hu Xiao annoyed and helpless. If he didn't do it, it would attract trouble. If he did it, Yang Chendong would have to lower his head. But would he lower his head? Even if he lowered his head because of his identity as Hu Xiao's grandfather, would he be willing to do it? Would he hate him because of this? Hu Xiao's expression changed again and again. Could be said that his heart was full of worry. Zhu Qiyu naturally noticed it from the corner of his eyes, but he didn't pay attention to it. Who told you to be the elder of the loyal and bold duke? Who told the loyal and bold duke to have the courage to resist the imperial decree? If I didn't make things difficult for you, you really wouldn't know that imperial power was inviolable. Seeing Hu Xiao's calm expression and slightly squinting eyes, as if he was shocked, Zhu Qiyu's mood became very good. Yesterday he had the same expression. Now that he had transferred it to someone else, how could he not be happy? Unfortunately, this happiness only lasted for less than half a cup of tea's time. An urgent report suddenly sounded outside the main hall, causing his attention to be completely diverted. Reporting, it's urgent. A soldier of the Great Ming Dynasty with a messenger flag behind him rushed into the main hall of the imperial palace. According to the law of the Great Ming Dynasty, a messenger could enter the palace hall to report without an imperial edict. Therefore, when this Great Ming soldier bravely rushed in, he was not stopped by anyone. There were only a few people who looked at him with surprise. Since the messenger had appeared here and said that it was an emergency, something urgent must have happened. However, there didn't seem to be any information that indicated that something big was going to happen. In front of the confused eyes of all the officials and even Zhu Qiyu, the messenger knelt down in the main hall and reported without raising his head. Reporting to your majesty, a large number of Japanese samurai suddenly appeared at the port of Tianjin. They suddenly appeared and caught the garrison unprepared. Before this subordinate came to report, thousands of soldiers had been captured and countless military supplies had been robbed. The other party's strength is valiant and their battle prowess is extremely strong. My general requests the emperor to quickly send reinforcements. After saying that, Bing Yong kowtowed to the ground to express his impatience. What? That's impossible. Many of the officials immediately voiced their doubts. These people were the ones who had received gifts from Kimura Yoshida. They knew very well that not punishing Yang Chendong was just an excuse for the other party. As for whether they would really send troops, most likely this person couldn't make the decision. Even if they really wanted to send troops, they couldn't have done it so quickly. Where was this emissary and the capital? How could Japan go to war without declaring war? What did he mean? What's impossible about it? Seeing the expressions of disbelief on the faces of many officials, Su Yozhen, the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, reacted quickly and shouted loudly, "Can't you see that this is probably a delaying tactic by the Japanese emissary? They have been in the capital of our Great Ming Dynasty for some time. They know that we have just experienced several battles and our military strength is weak. Jumping out at this time is obviously to take advantage of us. It's hateful that we were so gullible and didn't take any precautions." As he spoke, Su Yozhen shook his head with some resentment, as if he was angry at his lack of vigilance. But in fact, this statement was notified to him by the Security Bureau last night. That was to say, among all the officials, he was the only one who knew the truth. As mentioned before, Su Yozhen was a powerful official of a generation in history. Those who could become powerful officials were all people with means and ambition. If such people were used well, they would become a sharp sword that could cut everything. But in the same way, if they were not used well, it was likely that they would hurt themselves. In order to achieve the purpose of using this sword well, Yang Chundong deliberately told Su Yozhen in advance. This was also to deter him and let Su Yozhen know his strength. But he couldn't see it clearly. In this way, this person didn't dare to disobey his orders and would do things for him wholeheartedly. This was why Su Yozhen suddenly jumped out and revealed the truth. Su Yozhen's words were very much in the hearts of several officials. They all nodded in agreement, as if all this was really a delaying tactic by the Japanese emissary. Japanese samurai? How many of them are there? How is their combat strength? When did this happen? When Jining suddenly heard the news, his expression changed dramatically. But he also didn't believe that the Japanese would make a move at this time. Because in his opinion, even if they wanted to make a move, they had to wait until after Yang Chundong was punished. He had a feeling that there was something fishy about this matter. But he couldn't think of any problem, so he asked this question. If the enemy had too few soldiers, could it be the work of mercenaries? This wasn't the first time he had interacted with Leng Feng. The enemy didn't have many people, but their combat strength was extraordinary. Moreover, the Tianjin garrison was not on guard. If they attacked by surprise, it was very likely that they would succeed. Since someone had asked a question, the messenger naturally had to answer it. Replying to Sir Eunuch, it happened a few days ago. Many Japanese samurai came, and from a distance, they seemed to blot out the sky. Moreover, it happened so suddenly that my general could only retreat while fighting. After he was unable to turn the situation around, he ordered this lowly one to come find reinforcements. The Tianjin garrison's general did not immediately come to the capital to ask for reinforcements. What he reported was that he wanted to fight with the Japanese samurai. Because of this, the military situation was delayed, and the report only reached the capital a day later. Blot out the sky? Jin Ying's expression turned even uglier when he heard this description. Could it be that he was wrong and this wasn't the work of mercenaries? Otherwise, how could there be so many soldiers? If the number of mercenaries really did blot out the sky, no one would be able to stop them. Jin Ying's expression changed greatly. Who among the other courtiers did not have the same expression? Could it be that Japan really had mobilized its army to loot a burning house? Of course, they didn't know that on the battlefield, unless the two sides were actually fighting or there was an advance report, it was very difficult to accurately determine the strength of the other side's army. Just like this time, it was clearly the work of mercenaries, but Commander Gao Xiong had personally led 400 elites from the Leng Feng Navy to the Tianjin garrison, accompanied by 2,000 auxiliary soldiers from Chichen City. For the sake of bluffing, Gao Xiong had intentionally sent out many banners so that from a distance, it would appear that the entire harbor was covered in flags. This made it very easy for people to mistake it for an army. No one had imagined that this was a smokescreen set up by Yang Chundong. Everyone only knew that the Tianjin garrison wasn't far from the capital, and if they couldn't effectively stop the enemy from approaching, another battle to defend the capital would probably begin. At that time, the victor would be obvious. Quick! Which beloved official is willing to lead soldiers into battle? Zhu Qiu didn't want another battle to defend the capital. Last time, he had spent the young master's money, which had already caused him great heartache. Now, before he could recover from his shock, another unknown battle had appeared. While he was angry, his gaze also fell on the generals in the imperial court, lingering for the longest time on Marquis Wuqinghao Shiheng. Shiheng was the general of the army, and he was also the commander in charge of building and training the new army. In the army, his strength was naturally a cut above the others. But even though he had been on the battlefield many times and had very few victories, his heart was beating like a drum. It was not the first time that he had heard the name of Japanese samurai. They were simply outlaws, and all of them were brave and good at fighting. It was said that if one wanted to become a samurai, he had to go through hundreds of selections. If he were to deal with such a powerful army, how confident would he be in winning? If he won, everything would be fine. But if he lost, would his position in the army be affected? His position was stable enough now. Did he still need to take risks and fight? The answer was, of course, no longer. There was no benefit in winning, and if he lost, he would lose his high position. Shaking his head, Shi Hong looked awkwardly at Zhu Qiyu, who was sitting on the dragon throne, and knelt down. Your Majesty, the new army has just been formed and hasn't undergone any training. If we send them to the battlefield at this time, I'm afraid that they will lose more than they will win. Zhu Qiyu really wanted to reprimand Shi Hong, but when he thought about what Shi Hong said, he realized that Shi Hong was right. If he really sent the untrained new army to the battlefield and suffered a great defeat, it would directly threaten his throne. What should we do? Dear ministers, do you have any other candidates to recommend? Zhu Qiyu's tone changed. He no longer stared at Shi Hong, but looked at the ministers, hoping that they could come up with another result. Even Shi Hong had refused, which was enough to prove that the situation was tricky. Although some of the generals were a little restless after hearing this, they considered that if they lost, not only would they be implicated, but their families would also be implicated. For a moment, they could not help but shut their mouths, lower their heads, and act like ostriches. The originally noisy hall suddenly became quiet. The ministers looked at each other, speechless. Chapter 285. This scene infuriated Zhu Qiyu to no end. When there were benefits to be had, these officials didn't behave like this. They were all eager to show that they were capable, that they could be entrusted with important tasks and that they could accomplish great things. But now that there was a problem that involved life and death, everyone had the same attitude. They would hide as much as they could. He really didn't know what he could do in the future by relying on such officials. Minister Yi, tell me, now that the Japanese army has invaded our borders, what is the Ministry of War planning to do? Since no one took the initiative to step forward, Zhu Qiyu simply began to call out names. The first to be called was the Minister of War Yi Ming. Since the incident just now, when the messenger knelt on the ground, Yi Ming had lowered his head like an ostrich. If he didn't raise his head, no one would pay attention to him. But now that Zhu Qiyu had called out his name, he knew that he couldn't avoid it. He could only raise his head and say helplessly, Your Majesty, after several battles, the Ministry of War doesn't have any good generals or elite soldiers. Moreover, we've been busy building a new army. We really don't have the strength to do anything. Useless. In his anger, Zhu Qiyu didn't care about the other party's face and exploded. Other beloved officials? Do you have any suitable candidates to recommend? The emperor was angry, and the other officials were all afraid to avoid him. At this moment, who would dare to answer? Looking for trouble? So when this question was asked, the entire hall fell silent. What? No one has a suitable candidate. Do you want us to personally lead the army? Zhu Qiyu stood up from the dragon throne, his voice filled with boundless anger. These officials are incompetent. Seeing that the emperor was so angry, all the officials knelt on the ground and blamed themselves. But when everyone knelt, there was one person who didn't kneel. He was the one who always came up with ideas, the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, Su Yozhen. Your Majesty, this official has a candidate to recommend. Seeing that only Su Yozhen had stepped forward, Zhu Qiyu's eyes were filled with hope. Beloved official Su, what candidate do you have? Quickly tell me. This official recommends the Duke of Loyalty and Courage, Yang Chendong. Su Yozhen's expression did not change as he spoke without panting, using his calmness to pacify the agitated Zhu Qiyu. Duke of Loyalty and Courage? Zhu Qiyu had an expectant look on her face, but what she got in return was a sharp intake of breath. He had just reprimanded Yang Chendong and asked him to apologize to the Japanese envoy. In return, Yang Chendong disobeyed the imperial edict. For this reason, he had just arranged for Hu Shao to reprimand the other party a second time to save face and emphasize his imperial power. But now, he needed Hu Zhao's help. Looking at it this way, wasn't he wrong? Wasn't he slapping himself in the face? He thought that if he had not ordered Dong Chunhua to reprimand Yang Chendong, he could have blamed the war on Yang Chendong. After all, it was true that Yang Chendong had smashed the gate of the Japanese emissary's courtyard. But now, if he had reprimanded Yang Chendong, wouldn't it mean that he had already been punished? Moreover, the capital had been targeting the Duke of Zhongdan recently, and Yang Chendong had said that Japan was a friendly country and would not do anything to them? And wasn't all of this a slap to his face? While Zhu Qiu was still reflecting. I second the motion. After Su Yozhen recommended Yang Chendong, the Minister of Revenue Wang Ji immediately stood up and expressed his position. At the same time, he couldn't help but look at the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice in a new light. He found that this person could always do amazing things at critical times. For example, when the Walla army arrived, he recommended Yang Chendong. Turned out that his approach was right. And when it came to wartime, the first person who thought of the Duke of Loyalty and Courage was this person. But when it came to peaceful times, this person always made trouble for Yang Chendong. Suddenly, he couldn't see through him. I second the motion. The Duke of Loyalty and the mercenaries have a very good relationship. Once he can be asked to help, the Japanese samurai will be defeated in one blow like the Walla cavalry. The Minister of Rights, Hu Shao, also stood up at this time. He not only seconded the motion, but also expressed his opinion. A left assistant minister and two ministers simultaneously recommended Yang Chendong. This made Zhu Qiu's expression even more unsightly. In his heart, he knew that if he used Yang Chendong, the matter of the Tianjin garrison would be resolved. But this person's contributions were too great. If he was given a chance, how would he be rewarded after the war? Even now, he dared to defy the imperial decree. Wouldn't he rebel in the future? No, he absolutely couldn't give this person a chance. His gaze intentionally avoided Su Yozhen and the others. Zhu Qiu said in a very resolute voice, "Commander Shiheng, listen up. I order you to start preparing. Within 3 days, send 50,000 soldiers to the Tianjin garrison to eliminate the ethnic disturbances. There must be no mistakes. Order the embroidered uniform guards and the Eastern faction guards to immediately surround the Japanese diplomatic mission. Detain them first, then hand them over to the Ministry of Rights." In the end, Zhu Qiu made the decision not to use Yang Chendong. He didn't care whether Shiheng agreed or not. He directly made the decision in the name of an imperial edict. When His Highness issued an imperial edict, even if Shiheng was 1,000 times unwilling, he still had to obey. He didn't have Yang Chendong's ability to dare defy an imperial edict. Just like that, the court assembly dispersed. After Zhu Qiu walked out of the main hall, followed by a group of eunuchs, Hu Shao followed the other officials outside at a leisurely pace. Not far away, his eldest son, Hu Chongning, hurried over. "Father, are you preparing to go to the Yang clan manor?" "What for?" Hu Shao asked with a suspicious expression. Did His Majesty arrange for father to reprimand the Duke of Loyalty and Courage, and have him do what? Haha, Japan went to war without declaring war. At this moment, there's no reason for us to apologize to them. Thus, the Duke of Loyalty and Courage is already innocent. Didn't you hear His Majesty say that the Japanese diplomatic mission needs to be handed over to the Ministry of Rights to be judged? This is His Majesty's attitude. Wang Ji, the minister of the Ministry of Personnel, was walking beside Hu Shao. He immediately explained with a smile. After hearing this argument, Hu Chongning realized that he had thought too much. He immediately bowed his head and cupped his hands in embarrassment. "I see. Thank you, Uncle Wang, for your advice. You don't have to thank me. Even if this old official didn't say this, you can think clearly about this small matter. Alas, it's just that sending Shiheng to lead the new army that hasn't been trained to deal with the Japanese samurai is really a somewhat righteous act." Wang Ji shook his head lightly. He was not worried about whether Hu Zhongning could figure out the crux of the matter in a short period of time. This person had a good father and a good son-in-law. He did not have the guts to suffer losses. However, Zhu Qiu's decision to not let Yang Chendong take command, but to let Shiheng go, was really worrying. Minister Wang, you don't have to worry about this. Japan is just a small country. Can't make any waves. Even if Shihang is temporarily trapped, with strong manpower and material support, it's not impossible to win this battle. Besides, isn't there still the Duke of Loyalty and Courage? At worst, we'll just suffer losses first. By the way, hasn't the imperial court suffered a lot in the past 2 years? Hu Xiao stroked his beard and shook his head. Obviously, he was also somewhat dissatisfied with Zhu Qiu's decision. But he wasn't too worried. After all, it was a small country that was really difficult to put in his eyes. Perhaps, but it's unwise to send so many soldiers to the battlefield for the sake of face. How could Wang Ji not understand this truth? But when he thought about the consequences of the new soldiers going to the battlefield, what kind of losses it would cause, and how many families would be destroyed, he still felt distressed. Zhu Qiu did not hesitate to lose the new army for the sake of face. In his eyes, Yang Qindong's contribution was too great. It was so great that if he wasn't suppressed, the consequences would be unimaginable. Even so, as long as there was another way, he would try it. Even if he knew that he would have to pay a price, he had to do it. He couldn't send Yang Qindong every time a war broke out, right? Besides, the great Ming dynasty couldn't even find a good commander to lead the army. As soon as the court meeting ended, all kinds of news spread. What was worth mentioning was that the Japanese envoy, Kimura Yoshida, actually heard the news in an instant. When he first heard the news, his face was full of disbelief. Not to mention that Japan originally had no intention to fight with the great Ming dynasty. His previous words were just to pressure them. Even if the country sent troops, it was impossible for them not to inform him. Otherwise, how could they trap him? Is there any misunderstanding in this matter? Could it be that the news from the front was wrong? What if the people who appeared were not our samurai, but someone else who pretended to be them? Kimura Yoshida had a doubtful expression on his face as he asked Qi Shang, the guard who sent the news. Seeing that the envoy was still doubting the source of the news, Qi Shang anxiously said, "Kimura-sama, now is not the time to think about this. Presumably, someone is already coming here. The first thing we should do now is to leave this place. No matter what, we cannot be caught by them. Then we will go to the Tianjin Guard. If it is really our samurai, we will join them and send troops to the capital. Then we will ask them to release the other people of the diplomatic mission and compensate them. If it is not, then we need to find evidence to explain it to the Ming Emperor." Good, good. Hearing Qi Shang's suggestion, Kimura Yoshida nodded repeatedly. But is there still a chance to escape? Presumably, there is no time to leave through the gate, right? Kimura-sama, do you still remember the tunnel you asked me to dig? It was completed last night. We can leave from there without anyone knowing. Qi Shang's face was full of confidence. Because he didn't know the Ming Emperor's attitude, and for his own safety, he had already made some preparations. Now was the time to put them to good use. Good, good. Ichikuin, you have done well. Let's leave. As soon as he heard that the tunnel was finished, Kimura Yoshida's face showed a satisfied expression. Chapter 286. Good. Please follow me. Akashang nodded. In order not to attract attention, the two didn't bring anyone else with them. They only took some silver and entered the tunnel, leaving the diplomatic mission's courtyard. Less than half an incense stick's worth of time after the two left. A large number of embroidered uniform guards and Dongchong Fanzi appeared outside the Japanese diplomatic mission's courtyard. The one who came to carry out the mission was the commander of the embroidered uniform guards, Ji Guang. He first asked his subordinates who had been guarding the door, "How is it? Is there anything unusual inside?" "No, we didn't see anyone come out." "Good. Everyone listen to my orders. In a moment we will charge in and arrest everyone. Anyone who dares to resist will be killed." After Ji Guang gave the order to his subordinates, he waved his hand and broke the door open. As the embroidered uniform guards entered, the diplomatic mission's courtyard was soon filled with the sound of weapons clashing. In the face of the sudden appearance of the heavenly soldiers, the Japanese did not choose to surrender. Instead, They tenaciously resisted. However, due to the disadvantage in numbers, in just half an hour the Japanese were dead, injured, and captured. After the battle, the courtyard was filled with the smell of blood. However, the embroidered uniform guards seemed to be used to such scenes. They lightly counted the number of captives while looking for the enemy's leader. After a while, the former envoy, Aoki Yuki, was found. However, Kimura Yoshida and his guard, Aikishang, were missing. Master Jiguang, we found a tunnel that leads to the neighboring street outside. There are traces of people walking on it. It should be the missing Kimura Yoshida and Aikishang. An embroidered uniform guard stepped forward and respectfully reported to Jiguang. Want to run? Pass down the order to strictly check the city gates. They must not be allowed to escape. Jiguang said with a gloomy face. An important person had actually escaped. This was a dereliction of duty. Of course, if the two of them escaped, wouldn't it mean that they had a guilty conscience? Kimura Yoshida and Aikishang used the tunnel to walk out of the neighboring street. When they finally walked out of the dark and damp tunnel, they could breathe a breath of fresh air. A thunderous voice fell in their ears. How is it? The tunnel doesn't feel good, right? Hee. Tie them up. The one who spoke was Yang Wu. He had been waiting here on Yang Qindong's orders since last night. Although Deming did not notice the digging of the tunnel, the security bureau, who had already bribed the cook of the diplomatic mission, discovered the problem. How did the diplomatic corps, which did not do any work or training, suddenly increase their appetite and purchase many iron tools and bamboo baskets for digging tunnels? Yang Qindong had once taught him that any small matter could become a big matter. It all depended on whether or not it could attract your attention. After Yang San received the news, he increased the intensity of his investigation. Naturally, the matter of the underground tunnel did not escape his eyes. Thus, Yang Wu's actions came about. When the steel knife was on his neck, Kimura Yoshida still said arrogantly, "What are you doing? Am I a Japanese emissary? If you kill me, wouldn't that incite a war between the two countries? Can you bear such a sin?" "Sai, you talk a lot of nonsense." Yang Wu shook his head. This kind of threat was nothing to him. If not for the sixth young master's order to keep him alive, he would have killed him long ago. However, just because he could not kill him did not mean he could not vent his anger. He raised his hand and struck Kimura Yoshida's neck. The powerful force immediately knocked him out. Qi Shang, who was beside him, shrunk back in fear. Qi Shang's reaction fell into Yang Wu's eyes. Seeing how cowardly Qi Shang was, he could not help but glare. This glare scared Qi Shang out of his 7 souls. "Don't do it, I'll knock myself out." As he spoke, Qi Shang slammed his head against the wall in front of him. His entire body was bleeding from his head and he fainted. At least he knows what's good for him. I originally wanted to teach him a lesson, but unfortunately, I can't. Seeing that Qi Shang had knocked himself out, Yang Wu sighed and said with dissatisfaction, "Brother Wu, why don't you just kill him?" Lung Feng, who came with Yang Wu to carry out the mission, suggested when he saw that Yang Wu was not satisfied. "Forget it, there's no point in killing someone who has already fainted. Let's bring him back to the young master and let him do whatever he wants with him. Let's go, put them in the carriage and transport them out of the city. I'm afraid it won't be long before this matter is discovered and the city gates will be strictly checked." Yang Wu did not dare to delay. He was afraid that there would be a mistake and delay the young master's important matters. If that happened, he could not afford to be punished. The carriage that had already been prepared rushed over. After throwing the 2 unconscious people into the carriage, it headed towards the Yongding Gate. Not long after Yang Wu and the others left the city, the inspection at the city gates became much stricter. Under Ji Guang's personal supervision, even the carriages of the nobles and officials had to be strictly checked. However, this was destined to be ineffective. In the Yang family manner, Kimura Yoshida and Ikigami were thrown into the basement that had already been dug. In the academy Junko was originally studying. The miscellaneous knowledge taught by Yang Qindong made her indulge in it. She realized that the world was so big, whether it was the Great Ming Dynasty or Japan, They were just a part of it, not even 1/20th of it. This made her open her eyes, and at the same time, she was more certain that Yang Chendong was extraordinary. When she was studying seriously, Beta Persei appeared. "Miss Junko, our young master wants to see you." Beta Persei was second only to Tiger's mane beside Yang Chendong. His presence here itself represented Yang Chendong. Junko naturally did not doubt him and walked out of the classroom and came to the front of Yang Chendong in the inner courtyard. "Let's go. I'll take you to see two people." After seeing Junko, Yang Chendong smiled, and then very gentlemanly made a gesture of invitation and took Junko to the basement. With Yang Chendong's identity, it was not surprising that there would be a basement in the manor. What Junko was curious about was who she was going to see. When she came down the stairs to the basement and saw the unconscious Kimura Yoshida and Ikigami, she couldn't help but turn pale. She couldn't understand how these two people were brought here. Weren't they the emissaries of Japan? How could Dong Shuai be so bold? Wasn't he afraid of being tracked down? Junko's face changed again and again. Yang Chendong didn't care about these things and just casually nodded to Beta Persei. At this time, Beta Persei took a wooden bucket that had been prepared and poured it on the unconscious Kimura Yoshida and Ikigami. Under the water column, the two people were instantly awakened. When they slowly opened their eyes, they saw Yang Chendong and Princess Junko. As soon as the two people opened their eyes, Junko didn't wait for Yang Chendong's consent and quickly said in Japanese, "Don't expose this princess's identity, otherwise, I will let Dong Shuai kill you now." In such a situation, Kimura Yoshida and Ikigami could only nod their heads repeatedly in order to survive. On the other hand, Yang Chendong on the side had already understood the conversation, but he still pretended not to know anything and looked at Junko, seemingly waiting for her explanation. "Oh, nothing. I just told them to answer Dong Shuai's question honestly." Junko found a promise to make. Junko didn't want to disclose her identity, so Yang Chendong didn't point it out. Instead, he turned his gaze back to Kimura Yoshida and Beta Persei and asked in pure Chinese, "Didn't you always want to kill me? Now I'm standing in front of you, do it?" On the left side of Yang Chendong was Beta Persei, and on the right side was Yang Wu. The two people were staring at him with fierce eyes, so Kimura Yoshida didn't dare to move. He shook his head and said, "Duke Zhongdan, I think all of this is a misunderstanding? A misunderstanding." Yang Chendong chuckled and said, "You should know that because of your threat, the emperor of the Great Ming Dynasty actually wanted this duke to apologize to you. But this duke didn't agree and almost carried the crime of disobeying the imperial decree. If it weren't for your sudden attack on the Tianjin Guard of the Great Ming Dynasty, I'm afraid I would have bowed my head to you now." "What? That's impossible." Junko originally didn't know where Yang Chendong got the courage to arrest these two people, and what was the point of arresting them. But now, when she heard that the Japanese army had declared war on the Great Ming Dynasty, her eyes suddenly widened, and she couldn't believe it. No, we don't mean to be enemies with the Great Ming Dynasty, and we won't send any army to attack. Everything is a misunderstanding. I was just trying to scare your emperor." At this moment, Kimura Yoshida finally told the truth. Unfortunately, now that he had said something like that, no matter how one listened to it, it sounded like an explanation. Yang Chendong kept shaking his head after listening. "The facts are all there. The battle report of the Tianjin Guard has been sent to the capital. Do you still want to deny it?" "No. There must be some misunderstanding. It's likely that someone else is pretending to be you, intending to provoke a war between the two countries. Please investigate this matter. I'm also willing to go to the Tianjin Guard and confront the people there." Kimura Yoshida kept shaking his head, indicating that he didn't know anything. At the same time, in order to explain clearly, he was willing to confront the so-called Japanese samurai. Kimura Yoshida would make such a choice, which was exactly what Yang Chendong was worried about. That was why he kidnapped the two people here. He couldn't let the Great Ming Dynasty catch them. Otherwise, things were likely to be exposed. Fortunately, before he could do anything, the two people escaped through the tunnel, which saved him a lot of trouble. Yang Chendong naturally knew what was going on, and of course, he wouldn't admit that everything was arranged by him. Seeing that Kimura Yoshida didn't admit it, He pretended to be angry and said, "Very well. The facts are all there. If you still want to deny it, then I have to use some means." Chapter 287. As soon as Yang Qindong's words fell, Beta Persei and Yang Wu laughed and walked toward Kimura Yoshida and Ikegami. With the two's martial arts, they could easily injure their internal organs, but they would never let others see any injuries on the surface. Ah, it hurts. It hurts. Soon, Kimura Yoshida and Ikegami's painful howls came from the basement. In front of Beta Persei and Yang Wu, the two's so-called self-esteem was trampled on. It didn't take long for them to urinate and defecate, and the smell of filth filled the basement. Yang Qindong gently covered his mouth and nose, turned around and walked up and said, "Treat them well. When they confess, report to this young master." Junko followed Yang Qindong to the ground, but at this time, she was a little distracted. Obviously, she didn't believe that Japan would send troops to invade the Great Ming Dynasty. At this time, although Japan was still led by the emperor, because General Ashikaga Yoshimasa was too powerful, many things were not decided by her father. If the internal situation was unstable, how could they expand outward? Not to mention that they chose the powerful Ming Dynasty. If Japan attacked a small country like Korea, Junko could still understand. After all, Japan's geographical environment was destined to make them have to go out if they wanted to achieve something. But why would they choose the Great Ming Dynasty? But Yang Qindong said that Japanese samurai raided the Tianjin garrison. How could this be explained? In such a matter, presumably this person would not speak without thinking. Junko had no idea in her heart. After separating from Yang Qindong, she found the captain of the guards, Kobayashi, and explained what she had just seen in the room on the ground. Kobayashi was also shocked by the news brought by Junko. "Princess, is it fake? Your Royal Highness is still in the Great Ming Dynasty. Although your identity has not been exposed, once the war starts, I'm afraid it will be difficult to hide your identity. Wouldn't this put the princess in a disadvantageous position?" "No, you don't know the emperor. For the sake of Japan, my sacrifice is nothing." Junko shook her head with a bitter smile. Japan was originally a country where men were superior to women. Their men were the sky and could do anything. Women were completely an accessory. Even in the upper echelons of society, there was a tradition of sending women to each other. As long as everything was in line with benefits, it was normal to give one's young daughter to an old man. But, let's run. Xiao Lin still wanted to say something. For example, he didn't even have any kinship left. Wasn't this a little too cruel? However, in the end, he didn't say anything. The identity of the emperor wasn't something a nobody like him could question. Therefore, he decided to escape with the princess. Since the Great Ming Dynasty and Japan were at war, there was no benefit for Princess Junko to stay here. Once his identity was exposed, he was afraid that he would become the biggest hostage and live a life worse than a dog's. Escape? Based on the fact that we are Japanese, where do you think we can escape now? I'm afraid that as soon as we leave Yang Village, we will be caught. Junko shook her head. Compared to the unfamiliar outside, Yang Village was extremely safe. But if we stay in Yang Village, there is no guarantee that Zhongdong won't do anything to us. Xiao Lin said worriedly. No, Zhongdong won't. Speaking of this, Junko remembered the unclear relationship between herself and Yang Qindong. She was very confident, but in the end, she still found an excuse and said, "We are just businessmen. If he wanted to, he would have done it long ago. Nothing happened for so long, and nothing will happen now. I'm just worried that once Kimura Yoshida and Ikegami reveal my identity, then..." Junko didn't continue speaking, but it was obvious that she was worried. "Your Highness, don't worry. I will go to the basement now and end them." Xiao Lin's face was firm. No. Junko shook her head again. "If you go and fail, I'm afraid that the Zhongdong will blame you or even kill you. Let me go." Junko seemed to have made a great decision. She thought that even if she failed and was discovered, with her beauty and the friendship between her and Yang Qindong, the other party wouldn't do anything to her. But your highness has never killed anyone, Xiao Lin said worriedly. There is a first time for everything. Junko shook her head and looked at Xiao Lin. Korean Kun, I know you have a very sharp dagger. Give it to me. Okay. Xiao Lin didn't dare to disobey the princess's order. The most important thing was that this was indeed the best way to hide their identity. He immediately agreed, pulled out a shining dagger from his leg and handed it to Junko. Yang Chundong went out of the basement and came to the study. After a while, Beta Persei came in. Young master, Miss Junko went to the basement. Oh? She didn't discover you? Yang Chundong said without the slightest surprise, as if everything was within his calculations. Junko was afraid that her identity would be exposed, and someone would use her identity as a princess to make a fuss, so the best way was of course to silence them. No, Yang Wu and I hid very well, and now Yang Wu is watching. Beta Persei replied in a low voice. Speaking of which, not only was he tall, but his voice was also like thunder, which often scared people. For this matter, Yang Chundong reminded him a lot, so when he saw the sixth young master, he had to speak in a fake voice. Okay, then let's go watch the show. Yang Chundong stood up with a smile and went straight out of the study. In the basement, Junko held a sharp dagger in her hand, enduring the unpleasant smell, and came to the front of Kimura Yoshida and Ikegami, who had fainted on the ground. After Yang Er and Yang Wu's torment, the two of them were already in a state worse than death. They were in so much pain that they wished they were dead. Even when Junko came near, they did not sense anything. Looking at these two compatriots, who were also the trusted subordinates of General Ashikaga Yoshimasa, who is a headache for her father emperor, Junko can't help but feel angry. How dare they be so bold to suddenly send troops to the Great Ming Dynasty? How could they not know that the current Great Ming Dynasty was not something that Japan could afford to provoke? This was simply asking for trouble. Thinking that it was because of their wrong judgment that it was likely to lead Japan into the war and greatly weaken the national strength, Junko raised the dagger in her hand with resentment, and then suddenly stabbed Kimura Yoshida, who was closest to her, in the chest. Poochie! After the dagger entered the body, there was only a muffled sound, and Kimura Yoshida died and went to see the emperor. After killing one person, Junko seemed to be interested and forgot her fear. She raised the dagger and stabbed the heart of the other guard, Ikegami. Poochie, Poochie! As if she was afraid that she would not be able to kill the other party, under her anger, she continuously stabbed the other party several times. In the end, she killed the two of them until they could no longer kill each other. Blood also sprayed onto her face and clothes, but she did not seem to care about it. Until she confirmed that the two people were dead, she dragged her tired body and walked out of the underground room. Furthermore, all of this had happened without anyone stopping him. It was as if it had happened without anyone knowing. But Junko didn't know that there was a very hidden room on the side of the basement. There seemed to be an earthen wall, but in fact, it was just a disguise. There was a double-sided transparent glass that was taller than it would be a few hundred years later. From there, one could clearly see everything that was happening in the basement. Looking from the inside to the outside, there was nothing unusual. Did you record it? Yang Chundong looked at Beta Persei, who was fiddling with the camera for the first time. Young master, it's all recorded. According to your request, I also recorded a few close-ups to clearly record the scene of Junko killing the two Japanese envoys. Beta Persei said as if he was showing off. Very good, arrange for someone to send it to Commander Gao Xiong, and then let him arrange for someone to send it to Japan. Remember, you must personally send it to Ashikaga Yoshimasa. Yang Chundong said with confidence. He never had any good impression of Japan. It was only a matter of time before he dealt with them. And before that, in order to achieve his goal more easily, internal strife was one of the best ways. He believed that with this solid evidence, Ashikaga Yoshimasa could use it to attack the emperor, and Japan's internal strife was already a fact. At that time, it would be impossible for Junko not to stand on his side. Speaking of which, after knowing Junko's identity, Yang Chundong had always had a plan, and step by step it was carried out smoothly until now it finally paid off. With this video as evidence, he didn't have to worry about Japan's internal strife. At that time, his opportunity would come, and he could even send troops to Japan on the grounds of supporting Junko's restoration. At that time, it wouldn't be difficult to occupy the entire Japan and make it return to its ancestral land. Junko didn't know these things. On the contrary, after killing people, she thought that no one would find her. After returning to her room, she quickly changed into a clean set of clothes and went to the academy. She really did what she should do. There were no side effects or discomfort after killing people for the first time. Yang Chendong also acted as if nothing had happened. It's just that the scene of Junko killing Kimura Yoshida and Ikegami has been recorded perfectly. Not only that, he also took a copy of it to the warehouse, and then took out a copy and a tablet that could play the video. When the time comes, he only needed to take it to Japan and play it. Presumably it would cause an uproar. It was equivalent to handing General Ashikaga Yoshimasa a butcher's knife, so that he could raise it high and do whatever he wanted. Chapter 288. Because the Japanese samurai suddenly attacked the port of Tianjin, Yang Chendong's so-called crime of disobeying the imperial edict was not pursued. Since they had already made their move, there was no point in asking the Duke of Loyalty to make any more promises. The Yang village quieted down. Yang Chendong was his own teacher at the Yang Academy. From time to time, he would interact with the students and discuss some problems that people could not solve at that time. When he returned to the inner courtyard of the Yang village, he interacted with the several madams, thinking of ways to create the next generation. In contrast to Yang Chendong's leisure, the commander-in-chief in the capital, Shi Hung, was so busy that his feet did not touch the ground. The emperor only gave him 3 days to gather 50,000 soldiers and send them to Tianjin. However, most of these soldiers had not undergone systematic training. Most of them came to the military camp on the basis of their hot-bloodedness. Many of them were even influenced by Yang Chendong and joined the army. However, it would be very difficult for these people to win a battle. After Shi Hung returned to the army, he issued the order to prepare for war and allowed everyone to take the initiative to sign up. The result of this action could be said to be the result of breaking his heart. According to the amount of money Zhu Qiyu had given them, the number of new recruits this time was close to 200,000. However, when the order to prepare for war was issued, there were not even 5,000 people who took the initiative to sign up. Looking at the statistics, Shi Hung said angrily to his subordinates, "Since they don't take the initiative to sign up, then force them to do it. As for how to do it, you can decide for yourselves. In short, at this time tomorrow, I want to see 50,000 soldiers ready to go to war." After throwing these words to his subordinates, Shi Hung went straight to the Ministry of Justice. Kimura Yoshida and Ikegami had escaped and even disappeared without a trace. However, the previous envoy Aoki Yuki was still caught by the genie guards and was now locked up in the prison of the Ministry of Justice. Shi Hung came to see Aoki Yuki to get more information, such as how many soldiers Japan had sent this time, who was the commander, and what his personality was like. One had to say that Aoki Yuki was rather unlucky. First, he failed to assassinate Princess O'Hara Junko, and then Yang Chendong found an opportunity to accuse him of disturbing the peace of the capital and assassinating an important official. After which, he was arrested by the Bureau of Rights and imprisoned for several months. Finally, Kimura Yoshida appeared and rescued him. But in just a few days he was caught again. He had nothing to say except for lamenting his bad luck. Not only did he accept his fate, but he also didn't know what to say when faced with the torture tools of the Ministry of Justice. He really didn't know anything about the sudden appearance of the Japanese army in Tianjin, or how many people had come, or who the general was. Faced with all kinds of torture instruments that he could not name, although he was extremely afraid, he still did not say the answer that Shi Hung wanted in the end. It seems that he really doesn't know. Shi Hung personally saw the scene of Aoki Yuki being tortured. Aoki Yuki only shouted that he was wronged and fainted twice, but he still didn't say anything valuable. He couldn't help shaking his head angrily and said, "Forget it. Since that's the case, it's useless to keep this person alive." Just kill him and let the army use him as a sacrifice. Normally, when two countries go to war, envoys are not to be killed. However, Japan went to war without declaring war, and Aoki Yuki did not appear as a true envoy, so even if he was killed, it would still be reasonable. Just after Shihang said this, Aoki Yuki, who was still a little dizzy, suddenly shouted loudly, "No, you can't kill me. I know that an important person of our Japanese royal family is in the capital of the Great Ming Dynasty. I know it." "Oh, is there such a thing?" Originally, Qin Haodong didn't expect to scare him. He just wanted to kill him to boost the morale of the army. He didn't expect that he would force out such a big news. Thinking that if he could find this important member of the royal family, he could not only learn more about the movements of the Japanese army, but also make the enemy hesitate to attack. Shihang's eyes suddenly lit up. He strode to Aoki Yuki and said, "Tell me, who is that person? Where is he now? I need to rest. I need someone to treat me. Otherwise, I won't say anything even if you kill me." Aoki Yuki took this opportunity to put forward his condition. Aoki Yuki had been injured twice. If he was not treated at this moment, he would bleed to death. Although Shihang wanted to know immediately, he knew that sometimes the will of a dying person could not be measured by ordinary means. He nodded immediately. "I can ask someone to treat you right away. I can also give you good food and drink. I can even promise to let you continue to live. But remember, if you don't say his name and dare to play tricks on Marquis, I promise that you will beg for death." "Humph! Come on, take him to be treated." Aoki Yuki finally survived. And as Shihang said, he ate well, drank well, and even had a good sleep. But early the next morning, when he just opened his eyes, he found Shihang standing in front of him in a suit of armor. From this, it could be seen that Shihang was already impatient. After seeing Aoki Yuki open his eyes, his voice immediately sounded in his ears. "Marquis, whether you have rested well or not, and whether you want to say something or not, I only want to tell you one thing. I'll only tell you one thing. You have 10 breaths of time to tell me the identity and hiding place of that person. Otherwise, I'll kill you with a swing of my blade." After saying this with a cold face, Shihang pulled out his sharp waist saber and slowly moved it toward Aoki Yuki's neck. As he moved closer, he said, 10, 9, 8, 7. Cold sweat immediately flowed down Aoki Yuki's neck. He could feel that the other party wasn't just scaring him. He really wanted to kill him. At the same time, he began to think rapidly in his mind whether he should tell the other party that Junko was the princess. 3, 2. When he counted to 2, Aoki Yuki's body trembled. It was better to live than to die. Although he didn't know if he could survive after telling the other party. If he didn't say it, he was sure that he would die right now. Even if he could only live a little longer, it was still a glimmer of hope. He immediately shouted, I'll tell you. She is the daughter of our emperor, Princess Junko O'Hara. She is now in the Yang family manor." The army in the capital was gathering, and all kinds of useful information flew to Yang Qindong's desk like snowflakes. Yang Qindong shook his head when he saw that the 50,000 soldiers had already been selected. Most of them were poor soldiers who couldn't afford to send money to the Baihu and Shenhu because they didn't have the money or power to send them to the front lines. When two armies fought, no matter how good the timing, location, and people were, there was one thing that was more important, and that was the morale of the soldiers. If one didn't have this, no matter how many soldiers they had, they were likely to lose the battle. Fortunately, the opponent this time wasn't the real Japanese army, but the Yang family navy led by Gao Xiong. They must be anxious because of the lack of manpower, and these 50,000 soldiers were sent to their doorstep. Of course, they wouldn't reject them. Pass this information to Commander Gao. At the same time, tell him to capture as many prisoners as possible. These people don't have any complicated backgrounds, and they are all useful people. Yang Qindong said to Tiger's Mane, and then handed over a stack of information. Young master. This time Commander Gao will be very happy. Tiger's Mane thought that if they could capture these able-bodied men, it would greatly alleviate the problem of the lack of young men in Xiqian City. He couldn't help but smile and say, Yes, he will be happy for a while. Yang Chendong also nodded with a smile on his face. Since they were forced to be selected, then those who had a little bit of background, and even those who were rich, wouldn't be included. This time, Shi Hong did a good thing and gave him so many good soldiers. Just as he thought of Shi Heng's name, Yang Wu's voice came from outside the study room. Young master, there is a large group of people outside the manor. It seems like there are soldiers, imperial guards, and some eunuchs. Huh? Yang Chendong, who suddenly heard the news, showed a puzzled expression in an instant. Now that the war was imminent, no one should care about him, but why did so many people come? If they were looking for trouble, then it didn't make sense. In front of an external enemy, the most taboo thing was internal instability. Who had the guts to look for trouble at this time? Young master, I will immediately send people to be on alert. Hearing that so many people came uninvited, Tiger's man's body was overflowing with murderous intent. Appropriate precautions will be enough. They don't have the guts to look for trouble with young master. Yang Chendong shook his head decisively. If someone really wanted to do something bad to him, they would definitely not choose this time. Anyone with a little brain should know that this was not the time for internal strife. When Yang Chendong heard the news, Shi Hong from the outer court of Yang Manor had already arrived with a large group of people. Aoki Yuki actually said that the daughter of the Emperor of Japan, Her Royal Highness, was in Yang Manor. This news made him excited and worried. He was excited because if the news was true, he could get more information about the enemy by capturing the princess. At the same time, he could use this to threaten the enemy not to act rashly. He was worried because this matter involved Yang Manor, which meant that it was related to the Duke of Loyalty. If the news was wrong and Aoki Yuki was talking nonsense, then he would become a gun in the hands of others. What a stupid thing to do. Shi Hong was very smart. Not only did he have his own methods to lead troops to war, but he also had his own set of standards in dealing with people. At least he knew who he could deal with, who he could offend, and who he shouldn't. Chapter 289. In his mind, Yang Chendong was one of those people that he couldn't afford to provoke, perhaps even the most important one. This was because this young man had achieved success at a young age, had a straightforward temper, and possessed considerable strength. If he were to offend him, it would truly be troublesome. Until his position was sufficiently stable, he didn't want to have anything unpleasant happen to him. Even in the imperial court, when everyone was impeaching Yang Chendong for his actions, he had cleverly refrained from taking a stand, only following the crowd. He didn't object, but he also didn't deliberately support anything. But this time, the matter that Aoki Yuki had brought up was far too important, so important that he would rather offend Yang Chendong than take the risk. Thus, he had come just so that he wouldn't push things too far. Not only had he come, he had also requested the imperial decree to invite the commander of the embroidered uniform guard, Hu Chongning, and the imperial horse supervisor, Ru Zhu. He had invited Hu Chongning because of his special relationship with Yang Chendong. With this person present, the matter wouldn't become so awkward that no one would be able to extricate themselves from the situation. He had invited Ru Zhu because he was one of His Majesty's subordinates. He wanted him to see everything so that His Majesty could better understand the situation. Outside the Yang clan manor, Shi Hong, Hu Chongning, and Ru Zhu led a group of more than 100 people to stand in front of the manor. They allowed the servants of the Yang clan manor to enter and report, not showing the slightest hint of impatience on their faces. This alone was enough to express their sincerity. However, this kind of sincerity could only be given to Yang Chendong, the loyal duke. If it was any other minister, they would not enjoy such treatment. Once they had any doubts, they would directly kill their way in. How could they be so polite to you? Even if the other party was courteous, Yang Chendong couldn't just remain in the inner courtyard. And this wasn't even mentioning that his father-in-law was here. Under the protection of a group of mercenaries in camouflage uniforms, he came forward in a green robe. Camouflage uniforms held a special meaning in the eyes of important officials. Putting aside everything else, just the advanced firearms in their hands were enough to make countless people envious. But the only one in the capital who could truly command them was the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. It was said that not even the emperor could afford to invite him. The camouflage uniform also represented an existence that could not be offended. This was because not only did they represent themselves, but they also had a powerful force behind them. If they really offended them, fought with them, and suffered casualties, then who knew if the army behind them would send a large army to deal with them? If it really came, would the great Ming dynasty be able to withstand it? These were all unknowns. It was precisely because of the unknown that no one dared to try. This made the army seem even more mysterious and powerful. Now, as soon as these mercenaries appeared, it could be seen that there was a commotion in Shi Heng's troops. It was obvious that not only the officials, but even the soldiers knew how powerful these mercenaries were. Ha ha ha! I didn't know that the three of you would be honored by my presence. Please excuse me for not going out to meet you, Yang Chundong said as soon as he appeared and bowed to everyone. Everyone knew that this bow was for his father-in-law, Hu Zhongning, so other than him cupping his fists to return the bow, Shi Heng and Ru Zhu both smiled and did not say anything. After the salute, Yang Chundong still had a full smile on his face. But when he spoke, his confidence was obviously a bit stronger. But I don't know why you came to my Yang family village and made such a big scene. What's the matter? Doubts always needed someone to solve them. When Shi Heng and Ru Zhu's eyes fell on Hu Zhongning, although he was unwilling, he could only open his mouth and say, Duke of Loyalty and Courage, the matter is like this. The former Japanese envoy Aoki Yuki pointed out that there is a very important person in Japan in our great Ming dynasty, and he is in the Yang village. This time we came to take this person away. As soon as Hu Zhongning's words fell, Yang Chindong's eyebrows slightly furrowed at first, but then they quickly relaxed. He finally knew the purpose of the other party's visit. It seemed that the fact that Junko was the Princess of Japan had been exposed. Yang Chindong had already mentally prepared for this. After all, the fact that Junko was the Princess of Japan was not a secret. In addition, she was originally beautiful and was cultivated as a seed by the Emperor of Japan. There were too many people who knew her. It was too difficult for such a famous person to not be known by others. Fortunately, this person's value had been used when he killed Kimura Yoshida and Aikishang yesterday. It was not a waste to keep him around for so long. But there were more important things that required Junko's cooperation in the future. How could he just hand her over like this? Not to mention, what kind of place was the Yang village? How could they allow others to take people away just like that? He was a little unwilling in his heart, but since his father-in-law said so, it was absolutely impossible to drive him away directly. He still had to give face. When he looked at his father-in-law, his eyes were full of smiles. So that's how it is. In that case, let's arrange for Junko to come here. Tiger's Mane, go and bring her out. Yes, young master. Tiger's Mane nodded and turned to leave. His mind was full of the look that Yang Chundong gave him, as if to remind him of something. When he considered that the young master treated Junko differently, he made a decision. That was to tell Junko everything, at least let her be mentally prepared first. As for whether she was the Princess of Japan or not, it was not a problem that he needed to consider at all. Tiger's Mane left to find Junko, and Yang Chundong waved his hand. Yang Wu and the others immediately placed a large table here, and someone served tea and 4 stools, as if they were here to entertain guests. On the surface, Yang Chundong seemed to welcome the arrival of Hu Zhongning and the others, but the way he treated them outside the door fully expressed the displeasure in his heart. Since they had come uninvited, then there was no need for them to enter the manor. They could just stay here. As long as they could hand over Junko, it didn't matter to Shi Heng and the others whether they entered the village or not. Yang Chindong's past experience taught them that it was best not to provoke him unless they felt that they were strong enough. Otherwise, it was better to avoid him. Even if there were some things that couldn't be avoided, it was best not to enter the village. The 3 of them sat at the temporary table without the slightest bit of displeasure. They drank their tea in satisfaction and were even able to reveal the scene of them chatting and laughing. Yang Chindong's face had been maintaining a formulaic smile, but the more it was like this, the more no one dared to look down on him. Even Shi Hung secretly observed him several times. He found that the more contact he had with this person, the more he couldn't see what this person was thinking. It had already been proven that this kind of person was the most terrifying. He couldn't help but think that if Hu Zhongning didn't come with him today, it would be impossible to make him hand over Junko. He couldn't help but feel lucky that he had found such a good helper. In the Yang Family Academy, Junko, who was still in class, was called out by Tiger's Mane. She opened her beautiful eyes, blinking and looking very puzzled. But her heart was like a drum being beaten by a heavy hammer, completely not as calm as she looked on the surface. Kimura Yoshida and Ikigami were dead, killed by her. Although there was no movement afterward, Junko had always been worried about being suspected. After all, she was the person who went to the basement and knew the existence of these two people. She didn't know whether Yang Chandong had told others who was in the basement. If he did, it would be better, at least everyone would be suspected. However, if he was the only one who was told, then there was really no way to escape from it. Junko looked innocent. Tiger's Mane had to say something, because this was originally the young master's hint. "Miss Junko, please come with me. There are many people outside the village, saying that they are looking for you, and that you have another identity." After saying this, Tiger's Mane didn't look at Junko at all. From a certain point of view, he had already determined that there was something unusual between her and the young master, so she was an existence that he absolutely couldn't offend. Tiger's Mane then turned around and took the lead to leave, leaving Junko as if she was struck by lightning. Another identity? In fact, she should have thought about it. Her existence was not a secret in the upper class of Japan. Even if Kimura Yoshida and Ikigami knew about her, then it was inevitable that others would also know about her, so how could killing two people solve the problem? Now, they came to find her, so what should she do? When the war between the Great Ming Dynasty and Japan began, her existence was originally a very good target to be used. Even if she was the leader, such a person would certainly not be let go. "Well, Miss Junko, why don't you go? Are you not feeling well?" After a few steps, Tiger's Mane found that there was no one behind him, so he turned around and asked with concern, "I'm not feeling well." It seemed that she was reminded by Tiger's Mane, or maybe it was a targeted hint. Junko suddenly covered her stomach and said, "Oh, I don't know what's going on. My stomach hurts." "Hurts? Is it serious? I'll immediately find a doctor for you." Tiger's Mane's face was nervous, but his eyes were actually filled with appreciation. This woman was not stupid, at least she knew what was called a donkey going down a slope. Outside Yang village, after about the time it takes to burn a stick of incense, Tiger's Mane came out again. Shi Hong and the others immediately noticed that when this person appeared, there was no one else around him. For a moment, they couldn't help but look at Yang Chandong doubtfully. Their eyes seemed to be questioning him. In this regard, Yang Chandong was too lazy to look at them. He still sat there and casually drank tea, completely ignoring the three people's 6 eyes. Hu Zhongning was his father-in-law, he would respect him, and he must respect him. But this did not mean that he had to unconditionally retreat in the face of anything. This time, allowing the 3 people to sit here and drink tea was already giving enough face. At least if they wanted to ask him for help, that was a fool's dream. Chapter 290. Obviously, Tiger's Mane understood the meaning of Yang Chandong and walked out alone. After a while, under the doubtful eyes of several people, Tiger's Mane came to Yang Chandong's side and said in a voice that everyone could hear, "Young master, Miss Junko is sick, and the doctor is treating her. How can it be so coincidental?" Before Yang Chandong could say anything, Ru Zhu, who heard it, already stood up with a look of disbelief. Looking at him, he almost reached out and accused Yang Chandong of lying. "What do you mean by coincidental? Sick is sick? Is it possible that this is also fake?" Dealing with a eunuch, although this person's status in the eunuch group was not low, but after Yang Chandong showed his fangs in a timely manner, there were few people who could put him in his eyes. Therefore, to deal with Ru Zhu, there was no need for him to say anything. Tiger's Mane on the side took over the words and asked with an unhappy face. Tiger's Mane often appeared around Yang Chandong, But those who knew Duke of Loyalty naturally knew about this servant. Seeing that a servant dared to talk to him like this, Ru Zhu felt great shame. Who do you think you are? With your identity you dare to talk to me like this? What is his identity? My brother? You, on the other hand, aren't even considered a normal person. Who allowed you to strut around here? Yang Qindong, whose expression was as usual and whose gaze was calm, suddenly raised his head and stared at Ru Zhu with a questioning tone. The status of eunuchs in the Ming dynasty was so high that few other dynasties could compare with it. Even in a certain period of time, the strength of the eunuch group was second only to the emperor and much higher than the ministers. This also made some people arrogant and felt superior to others. But now, someone pointed out their biggest weakness, that is, the incompleteness of their body. How could Ru Zhu's face look good? Duke of Loyalty? What do you mean by this? Are you looking down on this eunuch? Okay. You can say that to others, but don't brag in front of this duke. Yang Qindong looked at Ru Zhai, who was like a red-eyed rooster. Yang Qindong didn't pay any more attention to him. Instead, he looked at Hu Zhangning and said, "Father-in-law, Miss Junko is sick. Naturally, she can't come out to meet guests. And this person is just an ordinary businessman in Japan. The so-called princess identity is simply nonsense. I think this is simply a lie before Aoki Yuki's death, to make us have internal discord, so we don't fall into his trap. Let's just leave this matter. Let's leave this matter as it is." It seemed very casual talk, but in fact, this matter was the matter. That was, Yang Qindong didn't believe that Junko was the princess of Japan. Whether other people believed it or not, they should treat it as if they didn't believe it. Okay, since Duke of Loyalty said so, this old man will naturally believe it. Hu Zhangning of course knew where to turn. This time, he came personally to give face to Shi Heng. As for whether this matter would succeed or not, it was not something he should worry about. Hu Zhangning got up and looked like he was about to leave. Ru Zhu looked at the side and gritted his teeth. This was clearly Yang Qindong and Hu Zhangning in cahoots. He could only look at Shi Heng and said, "Wuxia, you see." "Fine, since Duke of Loyalty is the guarantor, then Marquis will naturally believe it. Sorry to bother you this time." Shi Heng was a smart person. After knowing that this matter was impossible, he immediately backed down. One was the famous Duke of Loyalty, the other was the eldest son of the minister of the Ministry of Rights who served several emperors. Which one of them was easy to deal with? Now, his main task was to prepare troops to support the Tianjin garrison. As long as this battle was won, it would establish his position and strength in the army. At that time, if there was a chance, he would have some strength to compete with Yang Qindong. So what if he backed down now? What's more, if this Miss Junko was really a princess of Japan, it would be a good thing to let her stay by Yang Qindong's side. She would be a cannon that would explode sooner or later. Shi Heng had his own thoughts, so he went along with the conversation. Ru Zhu knew that it was impossible for him to get anything out of this. But today he hit a wall here, so he remembered this grievance in his heart. One day he would definitely return it. At that time, he would let Yang Qindong know that a eunuch like him could not be offended. Everyone left. Originally, they wanted to take Junko away, but because Yang Qindong acted shamelessly, they did not even see her. It seemed that the thunder was big but the rain was small. But that was not the case. The words Shi Heng said when he left were actually a trap set by the sixth young master. The words Duke of Loyalty had already damaged the relationship between Yang Qindong and Junko. If this person was really a princess of Japan, then he would have to bear all the consequences. This seemingly unintentional sentence was, in fact, a sharp blade was hidden in it. If it were someone else, they would naturally be worried at this moment, but in Yang Qindong's eyes, this was not a problem at all. The reason why Shi Heng did not make things difficult for him now was that he wanted to wait until he was stronger. But he did not know that as time passed, the expansion of the Yangtze's new army was much faster than the growth of the Ming dynasty's army. In other words, the longer the time passed, the bigger the gap between the two sides would be. At that time, how could Yang Qindong be afraid of Shi Heng? Not to mention, there was already a chance to deal with him. Inform Regiment Commander Gao to make preparations in the Tianjin garrison. We must serve our commander-in-chief comfortably. Tiger's Mane certainly understood what comfortably meant. Although Shiheng seemed to give Yang Chundong a lot of face on the surface, it was just an act. He wanted the Duke of Loyalty to ignore his existence and development. If he really wanted to give face, then he should not have brought people here today. He should have just sent someone to ask and go through the motions. But he did not do that. Instead, he brought a lot of people here, which already proved that he regarded Yang Chundong as his opponent. More importantly, both sides relied on the military. Even so, how could they get along with each other in harmony? With his shameless methods, Shiheng naturally could not complete the fact that he had an extra bargaining chip in his hand. But he was not discouraged, or it could be said that he did not have much hope in the matter of Junko. In his view, when two armies confronted each other, it was a competition of strength. This included military strength, financial strength, and national conditions. And these Ming Dynasty warriors should be much stronger than the Japanese samurai. Even so, what was there to be afraid of? He only needed to fight steadily. Once he reached a stalemate with the Japanese army, the final victory would belong to him. So after returning to the capital, Shiheng did not show any displeasure. He still followed the previous plan to prepare provisions, uniforms, and weapons for the 50,000 soldiers who were about to set out. While Shiheng was making all the preparations, Gao Xiong was also making preparations at the Tianjin garrison port. Today was the day Shiheng set out with the army from the capital. Gao Xiong also received the order from the 6th young master to serve the commander well. This time, the person who came with Gao Xiong from the sea to Tianjin garrison was Battalion Commander Nietong. In the temporary command center, there was a huge sand table which showed the complete topography of the nearby area. It was easier to see the situation and make better military decisions. The sand table showed that the distance from the capital to Tianjin garrison was less than 300 li. In other words, if the army was fast enough, they could reach here in just one day. Of course, the roads in the Ming Dynasty were not developed. It was very difficult for 50,000 soldiers, and most of them were infantry, to travel 300 li in one day. Even elite soldiers could not do it. But Gao Xiong still made arrangements and called several battalion commanders and company commanders to discuss countermeasures. The Yangtze army had a good tradition. Before the battle plan was decided, everyone had the right to make suggestions. But once the plan was decided, no one could have any other doubts. There was only one thing to do, and that was to carry out the plan with all their strength. Chapter 291. When the enemy counterattacked, they would immediately retreat and conceal themselves without a trace. When the enemy retreated, they would charge forward with the sound of gunfire, and the sound of killing filled the air. This would cause the enemy to be unable to hit them, unable to chase after them, unable to eat well, unable to sleep soundly, uneasy, and battered. In summary, there were 3 points: ambush, ambush, and obstruct. Sparrow tactics? After hearing this, Nietong and the other company commanders couldn't help but feel shocked. They instantly thought of the great Ming Dynasty's army being split up and thrown around in circles. Yes, it is the sparrow tactics, Gao Xiong said with a decisive tone. Then he pointed at the sand table and continued, "In this battle, we can't use a large amount of firearms. This means that our greatest advantage has been suppressed. If we want to win with a few people, we can only use sneak attacks and harassment. Fortunately, our cold vanguard soldiers are elites. They are all 1 in 100 or even 1 in 1,000. Even the 2,000 auxiliary soldiers accompanying us are slightly stronger than the great Ming Dynasty's elites. As long as we adopt the strategy of having the veteran lead the troops, with one Leng Feng leading 5 auxiliary troops, breaking up the whole into smaller groups and harassing them in small groups, we will be able to give the enemy the impression that there are soldiers everywhere. When they are exhausted, we will suddenly gather in one place and launch a large encirclement and annihilation. This battle will be decided." Gao Xiong's expression was serious, but his eyes were filled with excitement. After he finished speaking, he looked at Nietong and the others and said, "In this battle, We will use our actions to tell the sixth young master and all the soldiers and civilians in Crimson City that we can not only be dragons of the sea, but also tigers of the land. Yes, we are not only dragons of the sea, but also tigers of the land. Nyatong and the others stood solemnly and roared excitedly. Under Gao Xiong's leadership, the strategy was set. Next, it was time to redistribute the soldiers. In order to achieve the effect of having soldiers everywhere, the 400 cold vanguard soldiers were divided into squads. The first squad had 10 people and 50 auxiliary soldiers. This way, each squad had 60 soldiers. This way, they could hide themselves well and launch small-scale attacks. At the same time, they could train their troops. Presumably, after this battle, some of the auxiliary troops would have the opportunity to enter the cold front. There were exactly 4,000 people, divided into 40 small groups. After a day, they disappeared from the Tianjin Guard, hiding in the vast sea of commoners. According to Gao Xiong, this time, not only did they want to attack the great Ming Dynasty's army, but they also wanted to abduct a large number of people. With the rapid development of Crimson City, it could be said that the city changed every day. If they wanted to maintain this speed, they needed a lot of manpower. Even the elderly and children could be used. Using the sparrow battle tactic, the soldiers infiltrated the commoners and encouraged them to bring more poor people to Crimson City. They would work hard and contribute to the development of the city and their beautiful future. The sparrow tactics began to be implemented. More than 2,000 cold fronts were like leaves blown by a strong wind, disappearing without a trace overnight. However, Commander-in-Chief Shi Hong, who was cautiously rushing to the Tianjin garrison, was unaware of all this. Not only that, but as Gao Xiong expected, the army was moving forward steadily. Originally, it was less than 300 kilometers away. Logically speaking, it would take at most 1.5 days for the army to reach this place. However, 2 days had already passed, and the army was still searching outside Langfang City. Shi Hong believed that if he were in Gao Xiong's shoes, he would definitely set up an ambush here. Therefore, as soon as they entered Langfang City, the army of 50,000 became extremely cautious and searched the villages one by one. They stayed here for 2 days, and it turned out that they did not find any enemies here. Haha! It seems that the Japanese army is afraid. Very good. Order the army to speed up and enter the Tianjin Guard as soon as possible to eliminate these foreign races. The Emperor is still waiting for our report of victory. Since they did not encounter any danger in Langfang City, Shi Hong's originally cautious heart became much bolder. He thought that the Japanese army was not familiar with the terrain and did not dare to come out to fight. Therefore, he became bolder and ordered the army to speed up and go straight to their destination, Tianjin Guard. However, as soon as they took a big step, accidents began to appear one after another. Originally, they were prepared to have a good night's rest and go straight to Tianjin Guard tomorrow. However, during the night of camping in the wild, the entire military camp was attacked from all directions. Fire crossbows were used to attack from afar, short bows were used to attack from close range. In just one night, more than 5,000 Ming soldiers lost their place to rest, and about 2,000 of them suffered different degrees of trauma. According to the final summary of the data, at least 7 or 8 strongholds were attacked. In other words, at least 7 or 8 enemy forces launched a sneak attack on them tonight. How can there be so many? How many people are there in the Japanese army? Looking at the summary of the battle report, Shi Hong's eyebrows had long been knitted together. Because of the darkness, the great Ming Dynasty's army couldn't clearly see how many enemies there were. They could only hear bursts of battle cries coming from all directions. The soldiers, who had already become timid because of their excessive caution, began to retreat when they heard the shouts. How could they have the time to see how many enemies there were and what kind of weapons they were holding? Without a specific battle report, Shi Hong could not make an accurate judgment, which also caused him to be unable to find a better solution to the surprise attack in front of him. The only thing he could do was to shrink the army and set up defenses carefully. However, this was a passive defense. Not only did it greatly delay the speed of the march, but it also shook the morale of the army. However, Shi Hong did not have a good solution for these elusive opponents. If he sent a large group of people out to encircle and suppress them, they would not be able to find them at all. It would only be a waste of manpower and resources. If he sent a small group of troops, they often did not return or returned with heavy injuries. A small group of people who were lucky came back and said that the enemy seemed to be everywhere and endless. After staying outside Langfang City for 2 full days, they had been attacked more than 60 times. That was to say, of the 40 small branches under Gao Xiong's command, every single one of them had attacked at least once. More than half of them had attacked at least twice. Under so many attacks, the result was that the Ming army lost nearly 10,000 people. Most of them were injured, and not even 1/10 of them were killed. The battle losses were not small. After all, they had lost 1/5 of their troops without even seeing the enemy. They did not dare to imagine what the result would be if they faced the enemy head-on. Of course, this was because the Ming army was mostly new and had not been on the battlefield and had no experience. However, the most important factor was the flexibility, speed, and stealth of the Sparrow battle. That feeling of being everywhere, yet unable to be touched or found, was extremely annoying. We can't wait here any longer. We need to go to the Tianjin garrison. Pass down the order, the army is to set out. The head and the tail are to line up and set out in a long snake formation. However, if one group is attacked, the other groups do not need to ask for reinforcements. Shi Hong rubbed his dizzy head. His tone was filled with a trace of helplessness and frustration. When his subordinate heard this military order, he asked with a trace of hesitation, "Commander-in-Chief, how should we deal with the injured? Many of them have leg injuries, and I'm afraid that they won't be able to follow the army for a while. They should all stay behind. At the same time, send out a 500-man squad to protect them and send them back to the capital," Shi Hong said, a resolute light in his eyes. This was how it was on the battlefield. Once one was injured and could not move freely, one would become a burden. People like this would naturally be abandoned. After the order was given, the army of 50,000 abandoned nearly 10,000 men and set out for the Tianjin garrison several dozen kilometers away. As Shi Hong's army was setting out, Battalion Commander Nie Tong led 20 squads to follow. Gao Xiong did not follow. Instead, he led the other squads to the 10,000-some wounded soldiers left behind. In Shi Hong's eyes, these wounded Ming soldiers were a burden. But in Lung Feng's eyes, they were treasures. If there was one thing that Crimson City lacked the most, it would be men in their prime. Furthermore, these injured soldiers who could not move freely for a while were highly sought after. In order to quickly subdue these injured Ming soldiers, Gao Xiong finally drew his sword. The elite Cold Vanguard soldiers were all equipped with super-strong combat abilities. The thousands of auxiliary soldiers who had also undergone strict training suddenly surrounded the Ming soldiers like phantoms. Even though they were outnumbered, a single wave of attacks was enough to subdue the 500-man escort. When the advanced firearms were taken out, the wounded Ming soldiers quickly gave in. One of the reasons for this was because they were afraid of firearms, but it was also because they yearned for mercenaries. Many of them had even thought of learning more about mercenaries and joining them. It was just that they did not have the opportunity to do so. Now that the opportunity had appeared, many of them were secretly delighted. They felt that this was an opportunity bestowed by the heavens. When some of the wounded tried to resist, their weapons were snatched away by the other Ming soldiers. According to these people, this was an opportunity that they could not even ask for. Since it had appeared, how could they reject it? The operation of subduing the wounded soldiers went extremely smoothly, out of Gao Xiong's expectations. At this moment, he finally knew that the 6th young master's work in the capital over the past year had not been in vain. While he was happy, he also cautiously gave the order that not a single Ming soldier could be allowed to leave the group. At the very least, the news of the mercenaries appearing here could not be spread. It seemed impossible for 1,000 people to gather nearly 10,000 wounded soldiers. However, with the help of the wounded soldiers of the Ming army who had a good impression of the mercenaries, the operation went unexpectedly smoothly. Chapter 292. As for Shi Hong, when he led the 40,000 troops out of the Langfang and came to the wilderness, he was like a live target, being attacked all the time. Short bows were used when they were close, and long bows were used when they were far away. When he sent a limited number of cavalry to chase after them, the other party ran away faster than a rabbit. Shi Hong's mouth was filled with blisters due to the tactic of you walk. He disturbs, you stop, he hits, you chase after him. He was really furious, but he didn't have any better ideas. Originally, the army could have covered dozens of kilometers in half a day, but it took more than a day. It was not until the evening of the second day that they arrived at Tianjin Guard. As soon as he entered, the scene he saw made Shi Hong feel like he had been played and cheated. There were still Ming soldiers standing guard at the gate of Tianjin Guard, and the people in the city walked as usual in an orderly manner. How was this even the slightest bit like he was being attacked and trying to rescue someone? Shi Hong, who couldn't figure out what was going on, immediately sent someone to call the Baihu officer who was guarding the city. Only then did he learn that the Japanese samurai had suddenly disappeared 4 days ago. As for where they went, they didn't know. They had also sent a fast horse to the capital to inform about this matter. However, it was obvious that something had happened to the fast horse. Otherwise, it would have run into Governor Shi Hong, who was hurrying over. Ran away? Disappeared? Shi Hong did not think about why he did not encounter a fast horse on his way here. He was now thinking about why the Japanese samurai had disappeared. Could it be that they could really fly into the sky and hide in the ground? Did you search the city? Since he had already entered Tianjin Guard and ensured the safety of this place, his mission could be considered a success. Next, he had to consider how to expand the results of the battle. At least, he had to catch some Japanese samurai, preferably alive, and bring them back to the capital as prisoners of war. In this way, his position in the army would be more stable. No. The Baihu officer guarding the city shook his head with some difficulty. In fact, with the number of troops in his hands, he did not dare to do such a thing. He was naturally happy that the Japanese army did not appear. How could he take the initiative to look for them? Trash. Hearing the official's reply, Shi Hong's face was naturally filled with displeasure. Then, as the commander-in-chief, he gave the order to take over the city's defense. He also requested that starting from the next morning, there should be a large-scale manhunt in the city. He did not believe that the Japanese army would withdraw so completely. There must be some people left behind to inquire about the news. As long as they could catch them, it would be a great achievement. Because of Shi Hong's arrival, the Tianjin Guard became even more chaotic. The people in the city, who had just rested for a few days, found that the reinforcements of the Great Ming Dynasty had rushed into the people's homes like tigers and wolves. They rushed into the shops on the streets, rushed into the mansions, and rushed into the mansions. Speaking of which, these Ming soldiers had been suppressing a bellyful of anger. Along the way, they were constantly ambushed. Now that they finally had a chance to vent their anger, how could they be courteous? Immediately, they would not let go of any suspicious place in the city. Those who were wrongly arrested filled up the entire prison cell. This naturally caused the people's hearts to be in chaos. The elderly and children were bullied, women were bullied, and adult men were wrongly arrested as spies. It was not uncommon for them to be wrongly arrested. The atmosphere in the city was foul and chaotic. These Ming soldiers had just joined not long ago and had not undergone systematic training. Even in terms of military discipline, their self-discipline was extremely poor. Now, they could openly do some things that they did not dare to do before. It was like a competition to see who could snatch more women, who could bully people better, and who could extort more money. Most of them were sent to Commander-in-Chief Shi Hong. As the general in charge of the army, his subordinates would naturally give him a lot of benefits. Looking at the silver taels that were quickly piled up like a mountain, Shi Hong, who originally wanted to restrain his subordinates, simply shut his mouth. If he wanted the soldiers to work for him, he had to give them benefits. As long as they were obedient and obeyed his orders, he could just turn a blind eye to some small mistakes. After a large-scale search, they really did find something. Some of the Japanese descendants who originally lived here were captured and then treated as spies for the Japanese army. They were tortured, and in the end they would say whatever you wanted them to say. These real Japanese people who had gone into hiding when the Tianjin garrison was attacked by the so-called Japanese army became scapegoats at this moment. In the end, more than 300 people were captured, and their case files were pushed to Shi Heng. With this harvest, Shi Heng's expression finally improved. Thinking that the emperor was probably waiting for good news in the capital, he personally wrote a letter and wrote down his harvest. For example, on the way from the capital, he had fought dozens of battles with the Japanese army. In the end, he had successfully killed more than 10,000 people and captured more than 300, but his own army had also lost more than 10,000 people. The written battle report, which could also be said to be a request for merit, was quickly sent to the capital by horse. He continued to abuse his power in the Tianjin garrison, waiting for the emperor's reward. Then, he would find a suitable time to return to the capital as a meritorious official. Although the Japanese army had not been found, the silence of the past few days had given Shi Heng the idea that all the enemies had fled. Moreover, he was defending the city this time, so he was not afraid of a small group of enemy sneak attacks. Presumably, there was no chance. These Japanese soldiers, who had problems with food and shelter, should have retreated to the sea. After all, they had come from afar, and without sufficient supplies, they could not stay in a foreign country for too long. In order to allow the Japanese troops to retreat, Shi Heng even intentionally ignored the defensive line at the port outside the city. He only sent less than 100 Ming soldiers there and ordered that once the Japanese troops appeared, they were not to fight them head-on, but to retreat. They only needed to watch from afar and report back what happened. On the second night after Shi Heng entered the Tianjin garrison, the Japanese army really did appear. It was impossible to hide their vast army, and they were discovered the moment they appeared. The 100 Ming soldiers were extremely obedient and quickly withdrew. They watched as more than 10,000 people entered the harbor and then left on ships that had appeared at some point. When Shi Heng learned that the Japanese army had retreated, he was naturally overjoyed. Although the process of this battle was difficult and complicated, so much so that he didn't really manage to eliminate the enemy once from the beginning to the end, the result was good. Their army retreated, and his mission could be considered completed. He could finally report to the emperor. Full of joy, Shi Heng immediately had someone write a report of the victory. He wanted to tell the emperor and the officials in the court the good news as soon as possible. At the same time, he wanted to take this opportunity to publicize his achievements and take advantage of the opportunity to obtain some benefits. In the Great Ming, the Loyalty Guild was not the only one who fought. Shi Heng could also do the same. Then, he sent out soldiers to take the more than 300 real Japanese people who were stationed in the Great Ming dynasty in prison wagons, and then 1,000 soldiers marched back to the capital. According to Shi Heng's intention, everywhere he went, he had to announce it with great fanfare, as if he was afraid that others would not know what he had done. The report of the victory was sent in advance. Without Gao Xiong stopping it, the road was smooth. In just one night, the news reached the capital. When Zhu Qiyu, the emperor in the imperial palace, heard the news, he was naturally overjoyed and applauded. This time, Shi Heng had defeated the Japanese army. The significance of this was not as simple as winning a battle. More importantly, through this battle as the emperor, he had also gained a reputation for being able to recognize people and use them well. This greatly stabilized his position as the emperor, and it also greatly weakened the influence of the loyalty duke in the military and in the hearts of the people. If one day he stabilized everything, he would not have so many concerns when he wanted to take action against the meritorious officials. After the officials heard the news, they were both happy and sad. Naturally, those who were happy were those who supported the emperor and those who were on good terms with Shi Heng. It had been like this for generations. Only when the military was stabilized, other things could be done easily. Only then would they have the confidence to do things and be able to do better. There were not many officials who were sad, only a few. For example, the Minister of Rights, Hu Chang, the Left Assistant Minister, He Wenyuan, the Minister of Personnel, Wang Ji, and the Left Assistant Minister of Justice, Su Yozhen. They were either openly or inwardly on Yang Qindong's side. Originally, they thought that the naval invasion of the Japanese army would not be so easy to solve. In the end, they would even need the loyalty duke to come forward. But now, Shi Hong had been captured so easily. In this case, Yang Qindong's influence would be greatly weakened. Even when they wanted to take action against this person in the future, they would have fewer concerns. Yang Qindong did nothing. After defeating Walla, he handed over all his military power and stayed in the Yang family manor, teaching and educating people. He rarely came to the capital. But his influence in the military and in the hearts of the people had always been great. The name of the god of war was well known throughout Qianletong. It seemed that as long as he took action, there was nothing that could not be solved. Now that there was a substitute, it was no wonder that those who cared about him were so anxious. In contrast to the worries of others, Yang Qindong was much calmer. Even when he heard the news from Shi Hong, his expression remained the same. He stood in the room in the main hall and watched Hu Yen, Chao Yin, Lady Xiong, and Seventh Sister play mahjong. The immortal abode still had many programs to arrange. Lady Shui remained there, and Seventh Sister, Yang Duo, took her place. Even if Seventh Sister did not come out as a substitute, there were still backup players. For example, Junko. Even though there were enough people, she still sat obediently to the side. From time to time, she would pour tea and water for everyone, appearing very obedient. Chapter 293. Ever since Shi Hong and the others came to the Yang village to ask for her and were rejected by Yang Qindong, Junko recognized one fact. In the following days, unless she could return to Japan safely, she must be protected by Yang Qindong. This fact immediately changed Junko's mentality. Her original idea of talking to him as an equal had long been thrown out of her mind. Now, she seemed to have become a sensible maid, giving people the feeling that she was very well behaved. Junko showed this obedient side of her very well. She often left her shadow in the places where Yang Qindong appeared most often. By doing so, not only could he please Yang Qindong, but he could also please the madams. During these days in the Yang village, Junko could see that there were not many people who could influence the East Marshal, but the wives seemed to be able to do it. Therefore, she completely put down her pride and tried her best to please him. Junko was young and very beautiful. Yang Qindong seemed to take good care of her in the past. On this point, the first wife, Hu Yen, and the second wife, Chao Yin, had already communicated with each other. Marrying Yang Qindong was tantamount to falling into a nest of happiness. This was not only reflected in the aspects of food and clothing, but also in the way of thinking. For example, after marrying Yang Qindong, she didn't have to be like other women who didn't go out of the house when they had nothing to do. Usually, she would just stay in her small courtyard and wait to take care of her husband and teach her children. This way of doing things, who knew how many talented women's aspirations had been destroyed because of it, eventually making them mediocre and ordinary. This might also be a kind of sorrow for women in a male-dominated society. They were destined to be men's accessories and dependents. Most of them looked like they didn't know how to live without their husbands. All of this, in Yang Qindong's eyes, was completely different. Even if you become Madame Yang, it won't stop you from doing other things. On the contrary, as long as one was willing, one could get 100% support in whatever one did. Even if one wanted to go out to play or spend money, no one would stop them and no one would say anything. There was also no supervision and questioning from the in-laws. In modern terms, this was the absolute liberal party. No one would say what one should or should not do after marriage. No one would interfere with one's freedom. No one would even ask when one wanted to have a child. Even now, this was what many women hoped for in their hearts. After all, people liked freedom. Wouldn't it be better to play and see more while one was still young? Speaking of children, none of the 4 wives had gotten pregnant so far. This was also deliberately done by Yang Qindong. Including Hu Yen, she was now less than 20 years old. She was definitely a young girl in today's society. Yang Chendong admitted that it was too early to have a child at such a young age. He remembered that he once accidentally read a book that said that the best age for women to give birth was 22 to 27 years old. Even if it was for the health of his wives, he decided to wait. Yang Chendong gave his wives enough freedom and care. In return, they would naturally think of their husbands. Take Junko's matter for example. After Hu Yan and Xiao Yin discussed it, they decided to help the two of them. They could see that there were feelings between the two of them. Of course, no woman was willing to share the man she liked with others. It was just that, in the society at that time, it was normal for a man to have 3 wives and 4 concubines. Some even had many mistresses outside. Because of this, families were not harmonious. There were even many people who caused trouble for Xiao Chong. However, these did not seem to be a problem in Yang Chendong's eyes, because he had enough ability to care for each of his wives. This ability did not only refer to financial resources and power, but also to his body. At night, he was full of energy. Sometimes, Hu Yan and the other 3 women could not handle him. This might have something to do with his modern brain and ancient body. In this regard, sometimes Yang Chendong wondered if he had gone through something unknown that caused his body to mutate. Was that why he was so strong? Naturally, there was no man who did not want to be strong in this aspect. All in all, the result was good. Since Yang Chendong couldn't find the reason, he didn't probe any further. It was precisely because Yang Chendong was too perfect in all aspects that Hu Yan and Xiao Yin decided to pull Junko in as a sister after discussing it. It was just that there were some things that could not be said directly. Otherwise, it would be easy to overreach. This was why they took things slowly. First, they allowed Junko to enter the main hall and watch them play mahjong. It was an opportunity to slowly integrate into the group. Junko was given this opportunity, so naturally, she would cherish it. It was also after entering this place that she saw more deeply that Yang Chendong was different. His care for his wives and his 7th sister made him more tender in Junko's heart. Junko even had thoughts that being able to marry Yang Chendong was not a bad thing. It seemed that he was very good to his wives and did not have any intention of treating them differently. Several times, she saw the 2nd wife, Xiao Yin, and the 1st wife, Hu Yan, playing with each other. Just this scene alone was something that would never happen in the other great clans. It was because she slowly integrated that her impression of Yang Chendong became better and better. Junko believed that men should be like this. They should have an iron-blooded side, but they should also have a tender side. They should be decisive in doing things, but also have enough patience to get along with their loved ones. In these aspects, it seemed that Yang Chendong did very well and was impeccable. The mahjong game was still going on, but a few people were still thinking about it. At this moment, Tiger's Mane quietly came in and cast a look at Yang Chendong, indicating that there was news. "Let's talk here. There are no outsiders." Yang Chendong saw that Tiger's Mane had finally appeared, and the corner of his mouth twitched slightly, revealing a smile that no one knew. Even his eyes, intentionally or unintentionally, swept over Junko, who was sitting there with a heavy heart. The young master asked him to talk, so it was not a shameful thing. After a little hesitation, Tiger's Mane bowed his head and respectfully said, "Young master, there is a battle report from the front. Commander Shihang led the army to defeat the Japanese army and has driven them back to the sea." Pa! A fruit plate full of melon seeds and peanuts suddenly fell to the ground. Needless to say, all of this was naturally Junko's masterpiece. As the princess of the Japanese imperial family, she was naturally more concerned about the situation in the front than other people. Now that she knew the truth, how could she not panic? The fruit plate that suddenly fell to the ground happened to be at Hu Yan's feet. Almost without hesitation, she bent down to help clean up. While cleaning up, she said to Yang Chendong, "Rokaru, you know that we are playing mahjong here, but you still want to ruin our fun. Let's talk about business in the study." "Madam's order, I have to obey." Yang Chendong smiled and joked, and then strode away. From beginning to end, he did not look at Junko, as if the gaffe just now did not happen. In the main hall, Junko was absent-mindedly cleaning up the mess on the ground. The comforting voices of Hu Yen and the other women sounded, and even the seventh sister, Yang Duo, said that the war was originally a man's business, and they did not need to worry so much. The women did not know Junko's identity, so it was not wrong to say so. For this reason, Junko kept thanking them, but in her heart, she wondered if the defeat of the Japanese army had any impact on her father. What could she do? Although she did not know about the dispatch of troops this time, as the Princess of Japan, of course, she still hoped that her country could win. In the study, Tiger's man talked about the details of the investigation by the Security Bureau, and even the reactions of some courtiers. For example, the deputy censor of the censorate, Dong Chunhua, even let people set off firecrackers at home, and the commander of the genie guard, Lu Gui, called a large group of subordinates to book a restaurant to celebrate. Don't worry about that. Some people always like to be sad after joy. For these things, Yang Chundong casually waved and put it aside. Then, after a few breaths, he said, "In this way, arrange for Yang Bao to immediately print the news and spread the news of Shi Heng's victory, so that the people in the place where Yang Bao is present will know about it." Yang Bao? Spread the news? At this moment, Tiger's man stared with a puzzled face. He really couldn't figure out why the young master wanted to cheer for Shi Heng. If you want a person to fall hard enough, then you have to raise him high enough, right? Yang Qindong's voice sounded like he was explaining, but it also sounded like he was giving advice. "Oh, raise him to death. I understand, young master." Tiger's man was suddenly enlightened. As one of the most trusted people of Yang Qindong, he knew that the ones who really left at sea were not Gao Xiong's main force, but more than 10,000 captured Ming Dynasty troops. In other words, Gao Xiong and the others hadn't left. They had just created an illusion. However, in the joy of victory, or perhaps it could be said that Shi Heng, who urgently needed a victory, and even Dai Zong and Zhu Qiyu, who also needed a victory, seemed to have overlooked those wounded soldiers. Since the other side had exposed a flaw, Yang Qindong would not let it go and spread the news of the victory. If the final result was not like this, then the slap in the face would be loud enough. At that time, whether it was Shi Heng or Dai Zong, their expressions would be very interesting. More than 10,000 wounded soldiers suddenly disappeared. In the face of the news of the victory, people took the initiative to ignore it. But the truth was the truth, and it would not happen just because you did not want to see it. The Minister of War, Yi Ming, hurried into the depths of the royal palace at the end of court the next day and saw Dai Zong and Zhu Qiyu, whose face was still covered in joy. You're tuning in to the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.